Participe da segunda Conferência de Proteção do Meio Ambiente. A Junta Interamericana de Defesa e a Organização dos Estados Americanos convidam você para este importante evento no dia 18 de setembro, das 9 horas da manhã às 13 horas. Conecte-se via Zoom ou YouTube. Inscrições gratuitas aqui.
Únete a la segunda Conferencia de Protección del Medio Ambiente. La Junta Interamericana de Defensa y la Organización de los Estados Americanos te invitan a participar en este evento crucial el 18 de septiembre desde las 9 a 13 horas. Conéctate por Zoom o YouTube y sé parte del cambio. Inscripciones gratis aquí.
Join the second Environmental Protection Conference. The Inter-American Defense Board and the Organization of American States invite you to participate in this crucial event on September 18 from 9 a.m. to 1300. Connect to the Zoom platform or YouTube and be part of the change. Free registrations here.
Señor Mayor General U.S. Army Richard Haykan, director del Colegio Interamericano de Defensa, damas y caballeros,
Ladies and gentlemen, delegates of the member countries and observers of the Inter-American Defense Board that are joining us virtually or in presence, representatives of the important international institutions that accompany us today in a virtual manner. This Navy Inter-American Conference and the Conference of American Armies System of Cooperation of the American Air Forces Inter-American Defense College, Agency of the United States for the International Development, Department of Sustainable Development of the Organization of American States, Center of Defense, Hemispheric Defense Studies, William J.T. Perry, Embassy of Colombia in the United States of America, Armed Forces, Civil National Police, as well as security forces of each one of the member countries and observers of IADB, virtual assistants, and also those connected through our YouTube channel. We wish you all good morning. I'm the Colonel of the Air Forces of Peru of Special Defense Operations, Dr. Arrasco Covellaneda, Chief of Disaster, Environment, and Climate Change. And from the historic case of the soldier, I will give you some housekeeping notes. First of all, I would like to announce in the room of the council, I would like to tell you that we are located in the second floor of room 214 of Casa de Soldado, of Soldier's House, which has two evacuation routes at the right-hand corner and at the left-hand corner. And also, if you're feeling sick, please let us know to coordinate your assistance. This meeting has been organized by the Inter-American Defense Board according to the working plan of IADB of 2024 and pursuant to the AOS guidelines, the Organization of American States guidelines. And we are going to provide different perspectives of how this provides some orientation to environmental protection and our planning for the future years that will enable the participants to be more knowledgeable of today's challenges, of best practices and lessons learned in this fundamental area of life, as well as highlighting the urgency and importance of joint action to really safeguard our home, which is our planet. This relevant event will have as a moderator the moderator Adamilka Rodriguez Martinez. Adamilka is the Colonel of Fire of the Inter-American Defense College, and she will be our moderator. I give you the floor, Adamilka. Thank you so much for your presentation, Colonel Luis Arrasco Adaniel, who is the General Coordinator of the second environmental, or the second conference on environmental protection. Dear members of IADB and also members of the Inter-American Defense Board and all other honorable agencies accompanying us, members of the press, it's an honor to share this moment to talk about this environmental protection topic in order to take responsible actions and motivate people and governments to undertake policies that guarantee sustainability and global well-being. Mahatma Gandhi said, at a given point of time, Earth gives and provides us with enough to satisfy the needs of each man, but not greed of man. With this phrase, we would like to express our deepest gratitude for your participation on this second conference on environment protection. Now, I would like to give the floor to Brigadier Flavio Luis de Oliveira Pinto, Secretary General of our Inter-American Defense Board. The Brigadier General will give some opening remarks.
Inter-Americana de Defesa. Este evento é marco importante para continuarmos a avançar.
This event is an important framework to move forward to our joint effort to promote security in hemispheric protection. We will have renowned experts that will share their knowledge and experience regarding the current challenges and best practices that have been implemented to protect the environment in a global scenario that is more and more highlighted by efficient and prompt responses to climate change and environmental depletion. This event is key to reflect on the forecast and strategies to be applied in the future. We believe the coordination amongst organizations and nations is vital to face these global challenges in an efficient manner. Today's presentations come from different experts in this subject matter, and we will talk about how can we play a more active and transforming role in the protection of the environment, consolidating lessons learned. This forum represents, therefore, a unique opportunity for experience sharing and a very adequate space to create long-lasting relationships and connections. We trust that by the end of today's meeting, you will have a deeper understanding and know-how of how to act and how we can each contribute to a more sustainable planet. We would like to give and open the welcoming remarks by this Inter-American Defense Board. And again, thank you so much for the Organization of American States sponsorship and organization. Now we give the floor to Luis Almargo. Welcome to the second conference on environmental protection organized by the Inter-American Defense Board. OAS, the Organization of American States, and the General Secretariat is fully committed to support member states in overcoming environmental challenges that are affecting the region, especially climate change. America, it's a privileged region for its abundance and natural resources. Preserving such natural environment, it's vital for the health and prosperity of people, but also to conserve and preserve the unique beauty of our region. I really applaud and celebrate the Inter-American Defense Board for organizing this important conference, because as our communities face natural disasters that are more and more often and the effects of climate change intensified, we observe how this phenomena and issues affect the behaviors of millions of women, men, girls, and boys, affecting agricultural issues, and the droughts are altering and producing many droughts and floodings that aggravate poverty and also worsening migration crisis. Therefore, security forces play a fundamental role in the protection of infrastructure and order. The recent ministerial meetings celebrated or undertaken in Bahamas, the OAS member states adopted the Nassau Declaration to defend democracy, gender equality, multidimensional security, human health, agriculture, production of food, human rights, the fight against climate change, as well as poverty eradication. The Climate Action Plan highlights four key areas for the OAS and in their partners for the development, sustainable development of the Americas, like climate change, energy, integrated management of natural resources. Each of these areas work very strongly and closely together with partner organizations as IADB, the PAHO, the World Health Organization, as well with other multilateral like IDB, CAF, and we also have the support of the private sector and the academia throughout the continent. To conclude my remarks, I wish you the best. I invite the AIDB and other partner organizations to share the final outcomes of this conference, and please use the resources of the Secretariat of OAS to help you in your endeavors. Thank you very much. This was Luis Almargo, the General Secretary of the Organization of American States. On behalf of the Inter-American Defense Board and the kind audience accompanying us today remotely and in presence, we would like to say thank you for your opening remarks of this important conference that make us reflect on the actions undertaken in our hemisphere, contributing to one of the more sensitive topics of our era, which is the environment's protection. I would like to quote Mr. Antonio Guterres, General Secretary of the United Nations, that in 2020 declared the following: "We are all part of the climate global crisis. To face it, our efforts to achieve environmental sustainability are also essential. We must work quicker and faster and together for the legacy to our future generations. It's a planet that we can inhabit." It's a real pleasure for the conference organizers to express that with us we have more than 7,000 participants of more than 40 countries of the hemisphere and other parts of the world. And we send you warm greetings to all of you joining us today. Throughout the development of the conference, we are going to be taking questions through the platforms that are enabled in our YouTube channel. This will be answered by the spokespersons upon completion of their presentation. After the first three presentations, we will take a 10-minute break. Security is not an option, it's a strategic need for the nation's stability. This is from an unknown author. And with this phrase, we would like to open the floor to our first presenter. We give you the warmest welcome to the Lieutenant of the Mexican Navy, Alfonso Flores Rojas. He is from the Mexican Navy and member of the academic nucleus of the Higher Study Center, where he has been the chief of the PhDs, and he has received merits and awardings in his Navy work as a lieutenant. He's also acting in the investigation divisions of the environmental security of the hemispheric defense. He's here to talk about integration of environmental security in the hemispheric defense and security agenda. Lieutenant Alfonso Flores Rojas from the Mexican Navy, the floor is yours. Your Excellence, member of the Inter-American Defense Board, distinguished guests, members of the press, first and foremost, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to the Inter-American Defense Board for this invitation of such high relevance and of utmost importance. This is a dialogue space that allows us to reflect on a transcendental topic for security and well-being, not only of the Americas, but of the world overall, which is environment protection. It's a true honor to address you from the perspective of the studies in defense and security agenda by the carried out by our Inter-American Defense College in order to discuss this challenge that is the responsibility of all, not only as citizens of our respective nations, but as inhabitants and citizens of our Mother Earth. To begin with my presentation, it is very important to reflect on the reason, the purpose why we're gathered here today, and this is connected to a fundamental question. What is environmental security and why is it important? And regarding the logics of considering this element as a field of study, we can rest assured that environmental security as a study field is basically the protection of the natural environment to make sure that natural resources are not depleted up to a point that it can threaten the life of citizens. This includes risks derived from natural disasters, climate change, and the depletion of natural resources such as water and forests, but also is connected to the hemispheric defense and security agenda. The natural environment is closely related with social and political stability in our nations, and environmental deterioration can generate internal and domestic problems because of forced displacements caused by natural phenomena, as well as eliminating pre-existing conditions. Meaning, defense and security agenda at the hemispheric level, it's key to guarantee that states can prevent and respond to multidimensional threats. Talking about this multidimensional element, this invites the concept which has evolved, and also it has adopted climate security as well as environmental security. They're adopted with this cross-cutting perspective. In this regard, the integration of an environmental security is essential to assure long-term security. So the hemisphere has tools to face challenges such as deforestation in the Amazons and hurricanes affecting the region, not only regarding infrastructure, but also the defense and critical disasters. And we will talk about this later on in the conference. It is very important to ask ourselves, what is the relevance of studies regarding environmental security? Well, we can mention that environmental risks and impacts on security go hand by hand to phenomena as the rise of the sea level, intense tropical storms, droughts that affect critical infrastructure of countries and human lives that impacts directly on the stability of our societies. We have as an example, and it was mentioned by our authorities in their welcoming remarks, that the Organization of American States have warned that these factors aggravate poverty, massive migration, as well as conflicts, particularly in vulnerable areas as in the Caribbean countries and Central America. Environmental security cannot be considered a separate issue. It's closely connected to social, economic, and political security of our region. In the hemisphere, where many countries are highly vulnerable to climate change, natural disasters can trigger humanitarian crises, as what we've lived in past years, that stabilize entire nations and require interventions from the political sphere and the defense sector, not only regarding defending, but also joint efforts, which means there's a great impact on security and hemispheric issues because of this matter. Environmental security doesn't only threaten borders, but strategic resources as well as military infrastructures as those destined to maritime and port protection. For example, this icing on Arctic ice and melting of ice opens new maritime rights, which basically pose another big challenge on this decising regarding water level rise in different areas of the continent might demand more resources, and this really involves environmental conservation and collaboration between the political and environmental level. We also need to see the prevention of conflict out of resources. These circumstances have not been seen so alarming in the region, but this is happening in other parts of the planet, people going after natural resources. So we need to work in pacific and sustainable solutions to be able to deal with hemispheric controversies that might arise. In the last decades, the concept of security, as mentioned previously, has broadened and expanded to face non-traditional risks as the environmental risks. For the foregoing, it's very important to ask ourselves, as a hemisphere, are we really concerned, are we really interested for environmental security? Of course we are. We have historic cases where environmental factors influence insecurity. Mitch hurricane in 1998, Katrina hurricane of 2005, Otis hurricane of 2023, the water crisis in the Chaco region, the climate changes in Central America where the prolonged droughts have displaced millions of people, the tropical storms in the Caribbean region has influenced this natural phenomena, environmental crisis in the Amazons where deforestation and the different forest fires are a pending task to solve, especially regarding fires, meaning our strategic resources need to continue working. We need hemispheric solutions, and this is still current and this is still happening. However, it's also important to highlight that the hemisphere has summits and meetings regarding environmental security that have placed this subject matter in the regional agenda and the international agenda. UN conferences on the environment and what we know as Cumbre de la Tierra or Earth Summit has been taking place. And in Rio 2022, we established the challenges and the SDGs as well in the Millennium Summit of the year 2000 as well, COP 16 and CMP 16, we established the 8 objectives of the Millennium Development, where we ensure the commitment to work for the environment. And in the COP 16 summit celebrated or undertaken in Cancun in 2016, we also reached important agreements on the Green Climate Fund that will help fund projects in countries where they needed it the most. Also, the Rio Plus 20, which is the Sustainable Development UN Conference on how to build green economies, which is still current and important subject matter. Also, the UN Biodiversity Conference in Cali, Colombia, Nature with Peace, COP 16, it's again another show, an example of the importance of the topic. This leads us to current challenges regarding defense and security in our hemisphere, and this brings us to the subject matter of this important conference. The United Nations have identified climate change as a multiplier of threats, meaning it is the risk trigger and it promotes future risks and threats on existing threats as terrorism, drug trafficking, crime, because before vulnerable populations, these society enemies become stronger. The rise of the sea level and storms also pose a challenge, and they affect the security of our maritime facilities, the Pentagon as well, and likewise throughout Latin America, where mainly these maritime facilities are in islands or coastlines. Also, agriculture is highly impacted, which leads us to lack of food and food security, and forced displacements affect. And this, we can see the evidence on forced migration on vulnerable areas, where also crime, organized crime, proliferates. when they see these weaknesses. Climate change and the impact, it's multi-dimensional. It's a pending task that we are still under study. When we talk about challenges for the defense and security at a hemispheric level, we can highlight two core topics: inequality on response capacities. Not all the countries in the hemisphere have enough resources to face such catastrophes, which creates a need to cooperate amongst nations, to share resources destined to risk mitigation and preparedness on natural disasters. Also, our infrastructures are vulnerable because of the rise on sea level and hurricanes that are more and more intense, and sometimes they're unstoppable. This requires a restructuring of our infrastructure, including mitigation and adaptation measures before climate change. The foregoing, we also face an event related to the connection between defense, security, and the environment. The first is the protection of strategic resources that includes surveillance, not only on our natural resources, our water sources and biodiversity, but all types of assets that might be considered strategic for our defense, security, and environmental sector. Militarizing certain territories rich in resources can be seen as defense mechanisms before certain disputes, which increases the need to keep in close communication and to undertake also actions of politeness and cordial actions. In what we call environmental intelligence and risk management, this now includes an analysis of climate data to prevent risks and to also adapt defense strategies. The United States and Canada Defense Forces are already using climate intelligence or environmental intelligence to see how environmental risks can affect political stability in certain regions. The role of the armed forces, it's key in responding environmental threats. We have examples where we've seen the participation of armed forces involved in the environmental sector. The armed forces of many countries now have integrated response and preparedness mechanisms, which includes the defense and the first responders to be able to mobilize strategic resources such as water in case of need. The armed forces of Brazil, Mexico, and Chile, for instance, have been involved in operations to fight against forest fires and protection of national protected areas and national parks. These lead us and takes us to the need of really collaborating in an international way with multi-dimensional security and use the forums as this ones as we are today to talk and to further our collaboration. And to conclude, I would like to present amongst the findings we've seen in the framework of defense and security. These are the proposals for the sector. We require specialized units in environmental security, where the best practices lead us for armed forces to integrate specialized units in environmental risk. These units will be duly trained to intervene in natural resources to protect strategic ecosystems and to work in collaboration with other civil agencies for the protection of these agencies, including also planning, environmental planning in defense and security. It must include environmental risk assessments in the short and long term, strengthening of hemispheric cooperation to face this issue. It's important to undertake coordinated efforts as what we're doing here under the Organization of American States, as what the Inter-American Defense Board and the Inter-American Defense College is doing. And this is important because we can protect civilians and we can include other issues as mitigation and prevention and safekeeping of infrastructure and create resilient infrastructures as well and protect those that are not resistant. Regarding the hemispheric cooperation on environmental security, invite us to also undertake more conferences as the Ministry meeting of Protection and Defense to coordinate better towards this environmental hazards. And as conclusions, I would like to mention that the environmental protection has become key for hemispheric security. The different environmental threats as climate change are not isolated problems. They impact our nations and our citizens. Such threats have the potential of also destabilizing entire populations, create food crisis, forced displacement of its inhabitants. So this needs to be understood as a cross-cutting topic in planning, in the guidance and policies that we create in our nations. So the hemispheric security are not a secondary option. They need to be a priority to ensure long-term safety. And governments and at a political level, we need to consider the environment as an essential strategic resource. This leads us to highlight the preventive outlook as one of the first measures to consider to face environmental threats in a proactive way. It's not only the most efficient way to go, but it's also more profitable than just to react towards a crisis that is already unleashed, meaning prevention must be the main pillar in any security strategy, because the cost of just reaction and the loss of lives will be unmeasurable. The national and transnational environment, it's calling for us, and the hemispheric security is not just an urgent need, but an opportunity to create a more sustainable, preventive, and adapted approach to the new reality of the 21st century. Thank you so much.
Dr. Flores, thank you so much for this presentation. Now we have a session for questions and answers. And our audience we have some questions, and due to time, we have just selected two. The first, what role can play armed forces in the protection of the environment without committing their operational capacities in traditional missions of security and defense? Thank you. Unfortunately, we will have few questions, but the main answer to this question is to specialize armed forces in helping the civilians in Central America, North America, and Mexico. There is a permanent adversity before nature. I can tell you the particular case in Mexico. In the central area, we have the Marine Plan and DN3. It is for helping populations in case of earthquakes. We have brigades that have been created within the battalions that they carry out defense and security, but in extreme needs, some elements are integrated, some members of those brigades to help the population. But it will be very important to train the armed forces on how to carry out these type of actions. Thank you so much. Another question is, what examples of successful initiatives of integrating environmental security in the defense have been implemented in the region, and what lessons learned can be applied or taken? Depredation of our oceans, destruction of the oceans. Well, I belong to the Navy. Illegal fishing continues to be one of the main problems in the South Atlantic and in the Pacific. We have agreements. I cannot tell names because I could be captured, but in North America, the Coast Guard and the Navy of the United States support us to surveil fisheries in protected areas of the Latin American countries. We communicate directly with the authorities in Mexico. At the same time, they coordinate with Central America, and we have important agreements of integrated cooperation with Colombia, Ecuador. From the Galapagos Islands, we can surveil about those who are illegal, and these even reach Chilean territory. We are going to include all the Pacific area of the hemisphere. These joint actions between countries and armed forces are a clear example of how we can protect environment in cases such as illegal fishing. Thank you. Thank you to our audience of more than 7,000 people through YouTube. Navy. Now we are going to have Lieutenant Alfonso Flores Rojas of IADB. We want to thank you your time for sharing your knowledge. I'm sure this will be very useful in the development of our actions in the civilian and military environment. Thank you so much. We cannot achieve human development without protecting the environment we live in. The most vulnerable populations are going to be the first in suffering the consequences of the environmental degradation. This is an unknown author quote. With this quote, next, I have the pleasure to introduce our second panelist, Mr. Gerardo Arroyo. He became part of the Regional Office for Sustainable Development for Latin America and the Caribbean of USAID. Previously, he was a leader of the team of environmental finance since August 2021. He was the director of environmental programs, energy and resilience programs in UNDP in Mexico. During 7 years, he managed projects of biodiversity, the management of natural resources, environmental justice, citizen participation, climate change, and energy efficiency. He will share with us the topic of the importance of environmental protection to advance human development and reduce risks to the most vulnerable populations. Mr. Arroyo, the floor is yours.
Buenos días. Muchas gracias por la invitación.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Inglés, si está bien.
I will present.
So, good morning, everyone. Thank you
I
for
will
the
do my
invitation
presentation in English.
I'm pleased to talk about a pressing issue that touches all corners of our work, which is climate change. It is more than an environmental concern. It is actually a developmental and a security challenge, as we'll hear on later today. Climate change demands urgent action, and the stakes couldn't be higher for the communities in which we serve, particularly in Latin America and in the Caribbean. Without urgent action, climate change could push an additional 100 million people into poverty by 2030. This is not just a statistic. It's a warning of what's to come if we don't act now. Climate change is already exacerbating existing global inequities. It's increasing water and food scarcity. It's heightening the need for humanitarian assistance, and it's displacing people from their homes and contributing to conflict. Since 2000, climate-related disasters have affected almost 4 billion people, with an estimated cost exceeding $2.2 trillion. These figures underscore the need for urgent systemic action. The World Bank's data tells us that poverty will deepen if we continue on our current trajectory. The climate crisis is not something that affects only a few countries or sectors. It impacts every area of our work. So what is USAID doing in response? The answer is quite a lot and across many sectors. Every USAID sector and mission has a role to play in combating climate change. We're working to transform global systems like agriculture, energy, governance, infrastructure, and health. Our aim is ambitious: a resilient, prosperous, and equitable world with net zero greenhouse gas emissions. Our approach is both holistic and multifaceted. We are working with partner countries to implement bold emission reduction measures, protect critical ecosystems, promote renewable energy, and strengthen resilience against climate impacts. Moreover, we're facilitating the flow of capital towards climate-positive investments. This broad range of efforts is vital to our shared future, but it also means we must coordinate across many sectors to be effective. Let's take a look at some specific actions that USAID has been undertaking. First, we're scaling up renewable energy projects to avoid future emissions, helping partner countries transition away from fossil fuels. Second, we're emphasizing natural climate solutions. In many countries where USAID work, deforestation is the leading source of greenhouse gas emissions. By protecting forests, we can reduce emissions while preserving biodiversity. Third, we're focusing on adaptation. We know that climate change is already here, so we're helping communities prepare for its impacts, whether that's rising sea levels, more intense storms, or prolonged droughts. And fourth, we're also incorporating climate risk management into all USAID programs, ensuring our investments are resilient in the face of a changing climate. Now, let's zoom out for a moment and look at the bigger picture. Instability, whether it's caused by conflict or by climate change, is a security issue. Climate shocks, like extreme weather events, can wipe out years of development efforts in a matter of hours or days. They devastate communities, businesses, and even national economies. This year alone, we've seen climate-related disasters across the region, including floods in Brazil's Rio Grande do Sul state, which displaced 500,000 people. Ecuador is grappling with severe drought, leading to nationwide blackouts that have left millions without power for hours each day. Wildfires have ravaged communities in Chile and in Colombia. And Hurricane Beryl left widespread destruction in its wake across the Caribbean, but also in Central America and in Mexico. These examples illustrate the deep connections between climate change and security. It's not a future problem, it's a present one. To further emphasize this point, consider that climate-related shocks have doubled in Latin America and the Caribbean over the last 30 years. This includes everything from droughts to the rapid melting of glaciers to floods and hurricanes. These events are becoming more frequent and more severe. Even though we know these disasters will continue and likely will worsen, the world is still underinvesting in preparing communities for them. The gap between what we know and what we're doing is vast. And it's not just the sudden catastrophic events. Chronic issues like long-term droughts or coastlines sinking inch by inch into the sea are also straining systems. Despite all of our awareness, we continue to be caught off guard. Let me share a real-world example from Honduras. When drier weather patterns disrupted growing seasons, people's livelihoods and food security were threatened. This situation forced many to consider irregular migration in search of better opportunities. USAID's analysis shows that food insecurity increases the likelihood of intending to migrate by 33%. And when people are both food insecure and underemployed, they are 376% more likely to consider migration. These statistics are not just numbers. They represent direct human impact of climate change. One broader study found that recent drier than usual seasons in northern Central America contributed to a 70% increase in migration to the United States. Climate change is deeply interwoven with economic and social factors like migration. At USAID, we must address this nexus in our work. So USAID's approach to tackling these issues focuses basically on three key lines of effort. First, the mitigation of climate change impacts. We are protecting, restoring, and managing over 50 million hectares of the Amazon rainforest in Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. This is an area almost the size of France, and it is one of the world's most important carbon sinks. We're also working with local communities to build sustainable economic futures, so people can thrive while protecting these critical ecosystems. The second effort is increasing resilience. This includes improving disaster response capacity across the region. For example, we've spent 15 years working with the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, or CEDEMA, providing technical assistance and equipment. This helped them respond to the volcanic eruption in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, ensuring lives were saved through early evacuation. The third pillar is adaptation. We're expanding climate adaptation efforts across Latin America. In Honduras, USAID programs trained 14,000 people in adaptation strategies last year alone. In Guatemala, we've helped 63,000 farmers adopt climate-smart agricultural practices and access financing, helping them to improve their productivity and withstand environmental shocks. So moving ahead, and as we wrap up, it's clear that integrating climate change mitigation, adaptation, and defense is essential for building resilient societies. USAID's work in Latin America provides a valuable model of how environmental protection efforts can be linked with security concerns. Looking ahead, there are many opportunities for further collaboration between environmental and defense sectors, especially as the impacts of climate change continue to grow. I thank you all for your time today, and I look forward to any questions if there are in the discussion period we will have. Thank you very much.
Magister Arroyo, muchas gracias.
Magister Arroyo, thank you so much. We have a question and answer section. We have two questions for you. The first is, in your talk, you mentioned nature-based solutions. A person is asking more explanation on this, what this consists of.
Sí, muchas gracias. Prefiero responder en español para mantener la secuencia del idioma.
Answer in Spanish. The nature-based solutions, as was mentioned, these are actions that use natural processes focused on having a positive impact on those challenges that have to do with the environment. The easiest way to think of a nature-based solution is reforestation, but it's not just reforestation. It's all those actions based on ecosystems and that can provide a benefit by capturing carbon, the main gas. If we think we have reforestating or having better practices in a forest or in an agricultural field, or on the opposite, if we are using excessively these ecosystems, this has a negative impact. So the nature-based solutions is about using the natural processes in favor of protecting the environment. Another example are the mangroves. They not only help to capture carbon in the coastal areas, but they are natural barriers when the sea rises and impact the coastal areas. That's what we are trying to do when we are talking about nature-based solutions.
Gracias, señor Arroyo.
Thank
Otro
you, Mr.
amigo
Arroyo.
de la audiencia
Another
nos
friend from
pregunta
the
o le
audience is
solicita si
asking
podría ahondar más
if
sobre
you
la
could
interacción
give
entre
more
protección
information
ambiental y
about
los procesos
interaction
migratorios.
between environmental protection and
Sí, claro, con
migratory
gusto.
processes. Yes, of
Sí, es
course,
importante
with pleasure.
empezar
It is important to
diciendo que la
start
Agencia de Cooperación de
saying
Estados
that
Unidos para el Desarrollo,
the
USAID, no
USA
necesariamente es una agencia de
is
migración,
not
pero sí
necessarily a
trabaja en
migration
lo que llamamos
agency, but is
las causas
working
raíz de la
in the
migración.
root
Es
causes
decir, si
of
estamos
migration. If
trabajando
we are working, for
en aquellas
instance,
causas que reducen la
on
inestabilidad,
those
en aquellas causas que reducen la
causes that
violencia en las
reduce
regiones,
instability,
o estamos
violence in the
creando
region,
mayores
or if we
oportunidades
are
donde no
creating more
existen, esto va a
opportunities where
tener un
there are no
impacto
opportunities, this will
positivo,
have
digamos,
a
en
positive
reducir
impact
los
in
flujos
reducing
migratorios. Si
the
creamos
migration
oportunidades
flows. If we
económicas de
create
empleo
economic
que
opportunities,
además tengan que
employment,
ver con la
that
protección
in
ambiental,
addition they have to
ahí
do
es
with
donde está
environmental
el juego
protection,
entre
there is
protección ambiental,
where the
protección del clima
game of
y
environmental
reducción de los
protection, climate
procesos
protection, and
de
reduction
migración.
of
Esto no
migration is.
solo tiene que ver con las
This not
comunidades
only
que
has to
están
do with the
expulsando
communities that
personas, sino también
are
trabajamos en
expelling
aquellas
people, but
comunidades
we are
donde
working in
tienen
on
migrantes
those
sobre todo.
communities where they have
Y los
returnees,
migrantes con las
and
comunidades que tienen migrantes
the
en retorno. También
returnees,
estamos
the
trabajando en la
communities where the
creación de
returnees are, we are
oportunidades de
working in
empleo
the
bien
creation of job
remuneradas,
opportunities,
mejorar
well-paid job
la
opportunities,
seguridad
and
ciudadana.
improving
También
citizen
trabajamos sobre
security. And we
mejorar
are
los
also
procesos de
working in
transparencia
improving the transparency
y
processes
gobernabilidad
and
en las
governance
sociedades y los
processes in
gobiernos que
the
están
societies and
recibiendo
in
los
the
migrantes.
governments
Entonces,
that are
con un énfasis
receiving
muy
migrants,
especial en
with a
aquellos
special
procesos
emphasis
o
on those
creación de oportunidades
processes or
económicas
creation
que
of
tienen que
economic
ver con la protección
opportunities that have
ambiental.
to do with environmental
Agricultura
protection,
climáticamente
agriculture,
inteligente,
climate,
que significa
smart
usar pocos
climate
recursos,
agriculture
agua,
that
y
is
usarlas de la
using few
manera en que se
resources,
pueda
water,
aprovechar más,
uh,
cambiar el
so that
tipo
you can
de
take
cosechas que se están
take a better
haciendo a que sean
advantage of
cosechas
it,
más tolerantes a
uh,
las sequías,
more
o
tolerant
utilizar,
drought
como lo decía en el ejemplo
harvests, or
anterior,
using
prácticas mejoradas para
improved
conservar los
practices
bosques
to
y las áreas
preserve
naturales protegidas de
forests
los
and
lugares
protected natural
de donde
areas
vienen estas comunidades migrantes.
in the places where these migrants,
Muchas
in the
gracias a
communities
los
where
amigos de
these
la
are
audiencia,
migrants
amigos y
belong.
amigas de la audiencia,
Thank you,
por
friends of the
hacernos llegar
audience,
su
for
pregunta.
sending your questions.
Mr. Arroyo,
Mr. Arroyo,
tanto a usted como a la USAID, a nombre de la Junta Interamericana de Defensa,
on
queremos
behalf of
agradecerle
the
por la brillante
Inter-American
presentación
Defense
que
Board,
nos
we
ha
want to
brindado.
thank you,
Gracias por su apoyo
you and
y le
both
seguimos
you and
augurando éxito
USAID
en su
for your
designación y
presentation,
funciones.
and
Muchas
we wish you
gracias.
success
Muchas
in all
gracias.
your endeavors.
Acto seguido, tengo el agrado
Next, I
o el
have the
grato placer
pleasure
de presentar a nuestro
of
tercer panelista,
introducing our
el coronel
third
piloto Fuerza
panelist,
Aérea de República Dominicana,
Colonel
Magíster
Pilot
Rubén
of
Guillermo
the
Mejía del
Dominican
Carmen,
Republic Air
quien
Force,
actualmente se encuentra
um,
en representación del Sistema de
Rubén
Cooperación de las
Mejía.
Fuerzas Aéreas Americanas,
He
SICOFA.
is in
El coronel
representation
Mejía
of
del Carmen
the
cuenta con una
cooperation
maestría en
system of the
diplomacia, relaciones
American Armed
internacionales,
Forces,
seguridad
ICOFA.
y
He has
defensa,
a master's
realizada en el
degree
Instituto
in diplomacy,
Internacional de Estudios
international
en Seguridad
relationship,
Global
security, and
en Madrid,
defense
Reino de España, con doble
from
titulación
the
en la
INISEC
Universidad
Institute of
Telemática
Madrid,
Pegaso de
España.
Nápoles, Italia. Asimismo,
Uh,
cuenta con una especialidad en
he
seguridad de
has
vuelo
a
e
double
investigación de accidentes de
diploma
aviación,
from the
realizada en la base
Telematic
aérea
University
Clan de la
Pegaso.
USAF,
He also has a
en Albuquerque,
specialty
New
on
Mexico.
flight
Nos expondrá el
security.
tema,
He
el
will
medio
present the
ambiente como
issue of
factor en la seguridad
environment
operacional de la
as a
aviación.
the environment
Señor
as a
Coronel
factor
Mejía
in
del Carmen, muy
aviation
buenos
operational
días. La
security.
audiencia es suya.
The floor is yours.
Muy buenos días a todos. De verdad que es un
Good
placer y un
morning,
honor
everybody.
que
It's
me
a
hayan
pleasure
invitado
and an
a un
honor
evento
to
de
be
representación
invited to
por
this
parte de lo que
forum.
es el
I
SICOFA.
am representing
Tendremos a bien
SICOFA.
exponerle un tema bien
I will
interesante que es
present
sobre
a
el
very
medio ambiente como
interesting topic.
factor en la
This is
seguridad
about
operacional
the
de la aviación.
environment as a factor in
Para este tema
aviation
vamos a
operational
abordar una agenda,
security. We are
la
going to
cual
develop an
consiste en los
agenda,
siguientes puntos.
and the points of the items of the agenda are the following.
En la primera parte
The
vamos a
first
ver el medio
part,
ambiente como factor en la seguridad
we will
operacional de la
address
aviación.
the environment as a factor
Con los subtemas, las
In aviation operational security, the subtopics are the meteorological conditions and operational security, volcanoes as a factor on operational security, the impact of birds and fauna on operational security, and climate change and operational security. The part two is the impact of aviation on environment. And at the end, we'll have some conclusions. As an introduction, we have to mention that the environment plays a crucial role on operational security in aviation. Extreme weather conditions, the presence of wild fauna, and the quality of air can affect significantly air operations. Severe storms, turbulences, reduced visibility can risk operational security in flights. In addition, birds and other animals can represent a danger for planes. On the contrary, aviation also impacts the environment with gas emissions of its propulsion systems, but it is worth mentioning that there are measures being taken to mitigate the negative effects. On behalf of bodies such as OACA and the Federal Administration Aviation. Part two, we will address the environment. We are going to talk about the weather conditions and operational security. It is important to mention that the weather factor represents one of the most important factors for accidents. So basically, we have to mention that they represent 50% of accident cases. And if we see this as a chain, we will have 35 accidents. We have to mention, of course, the main meteorological phenomena causing incidents and accidents in aviation. Some of them are severe turbulence. These are sudden changes in the speed of the wind. This is one of the most common threats. There are 9 types of turbulences, but they can appear at any time. The important thing is the extreme or severe turbulence. That it means that the winds that aircrafts face exceed or equal to 100 knots, that these can affect passengers and cause injuries, and the pilots can lose control of the aircraft. The flight of American Airlines in 2029 in New York faced this. Another main meteorological causes producing negative effects is hail. This can come with the wind currents. This comes from the floor upward, and they can produce balls the size of a tennis ball, and this causes important damages to aircrafts. Obviously, the navigation tools should help the pilot avoid these areas, but obviously sometimes there are not many options, but they happen. And these aircrafts go through these areas, and they can be hit through these events. Another phenomena, because of weather sudden changes, is freezing. This is produced within clouds, bad weather, and this can neutralize flight controls. And this has happened several times. When countermeasures to prevent this cannot be activated, neutralize the system and the freezing continues and the aircrafts can be impacted. Another important event normally is shear or near the surface or known as wind shear. This is basically some descending currents under clouds. Apparently, there is no rain at the airport, but if it is present, it may be provoking descending air currents, not clear for the pilots. And when they are landing or departing, the aircraft can be affected. And the pilot will have only 15 seconds to react. And this is caused because of the degradation of climate and the global warming.
Other factors producing security problems, operationally wise, it's volcanoes. These evidently are factors that can be predictable in a certain measure because they give some signals and prior alert. What we cannot foresee is the prediction of eruptions and how is it going to affect the zone where the eruption will take place. And of course, many commercial planes in the past decades have suffered accidents by these volcanic ash clouds. Regarding the common security hazards of volcanoes, we can mention the following. We have the example of a Boeing 747 of British Airways that in June 1982, the four engines basically broke down when it was flying through Indonesia. Another was Flight 747 of KLM that suffered the same type of episode flying over Alaska a year later, and this was volcanoes Galunggung and Red Pout. This, of course, were volcanoes that erupted and there was volcanic ash that covered an area that was bigger than they thought. Initially, it wouldn't seem such a severe issue, and aircrafts try to avoid the ash area, but sometimes the cloud can be so expansive that can produce damages to the engines and the turbines of aircrafts. Volcanic ash affects the turbines more than the different type of turbines, and also this the turbines breathe in and the propellers are also affected, and also ashes can get condensated and they can even block a propeller or an engine, as the case that I just mentioned. Regarding the volcanic eruptions, we have some example like the eruption volcano of Eyjafjallajökull in Iceland, which was in 2010. This volcano in Iceland was really one very impactful phenomenon, and the coverage area and the cloud expansion was huge. Basically, this caused such a severe impact that European airlines, just mention a few of the European airlines because Iceland is in Europe, cost around 1.7 million euros in losses, and it affected the global GDP up to almost 500 million euros. So we can see the economic burden that these natural disasters also cause. Here we have another example in the slides where you can see the level and the range of volcanic ash at a global area. You can see the red dot is Iceland, but look at the range of the ash cloud at a globe level. Now, why can this volcanic ash can be so dangerous for aircrafts? I just mentioned a few fundamental reasons, but we can also say that when these are ingested by the engines, it melts within the engines, which causes a temperature fusion with the particles. Also, it's a very abrasive, it has an abrasive texture and can really adhere to certain parts of the engine and provoke collapse. And for you that know some technical things about aircrafts, we have a hardware which is providing or sending information, and basically it is the feature that reads speed and others, and this can be affected and can make the pilot fail in what we call spatial disorientation. And again, wrong readings can affect the aircraft functioning, as well as lack of visibility due to the ash clouds, the low density or the size of these ash particles can range between 500 micras to 2 millimeters in size, and sometimes it's not something perceptible to human eyes, but it's really something that can affect visibility to the aircraft. There's some mitigating measures that we can also adopt. And there was once an office called OASI that was enforced 80 years ago. It was a very specific office that dealt with volcanic phenomena, and also they commended a mission to the International Volcanic Ash Task Force to assess the needs of civil aviation to anticipate to this type of accidents and how to determine the necessary actions in a case-by-case basis. And they designated basically 9 meteorological specialized zone centers that were located in London, Toulouse, Montreal, Washington, Anchorage, Tokyo, Darwin, Wellington, and Buenos Aires. And these centers basically oversee volcanoes, and they are constantly sending standard information and prediction models, excuse me, in order to anticipate to eruptions. Because once these volcanoes erupt, we never know how the cloud range will affect aircrafts. We come to a very important part on the environment and how it affects operational security, and this is impacts with birds and fauna. This topics is not isolated. Sometimes this type of displacement, migration of birds, wildlife, this it's getting more and more complicated, and it's out of the season or the periods of the season because of global warming. So wildlife is being strongly affected by climate change and global warming. Definitely, wildlife inhabits everywhere. And sometimes we have airports surrounded by vegetation and by forest. And there we can see the impacts. And sometimes when we are cutting grass, this attracts birds. And of course, in an airport, you need to be able to, to do some grass control and some vegetation controls like this. We see that wildlife and fauna goes to the places where there's freshly cut grass because insects will come up or because it's just the seeds are attractive to these animals. So then birds and other types of wildlife comes to freshly cut grass areas and causes hazards to aviation. Regarding the related risks, we can mention some, which are engine damage. As you can see in the picture, this is a bird impacting the engine of an aircraft, structural damages, committing disability, and emergency situations. In this graph, you can see the type of birds that usually we have around our airports and surrounding areas, and the areas that are affected by birds, which are mainly the engines and the turbines in 44%, and the engines 31%. And here, this picture talks by itself. I don't know if you remember, this was the flight of US Airways in 15, it was flight 1546 of 2009. A movie was made with this case. It was an aircraft in New York of US Airways where the basically the engines aspired and kind of sucked some of the pelicans that were flying and migrating through the United States over the Hudson River. And luckily, the crew nor pilots suffered from any damages or losses, but the aircraft was totally lost. And this is just an example how birds, in this case pelicans, affected US Airways flight. Also, we can talk about the Israeli flight 2973 of 1995 from the Armed Forces of Israel. Also, a shock of white pelicans impacted the aircraft, and all of the crew died. And also the passengers. It was really a tragedy. Also, Eastern Airlines in 1985, flight 90, it was basically geese that were in the Logan Airport in Boston with tragic losses. So, what are the measures being implemented to mitigate the situation of shocks with fauna and wildlife? We, of course, have to undertake current fauna studies to understand the natural habitats of birds and migration patterns of local birds. Also, there are some techniques, some deterrence techniques. Some are more active, some are more passive. And here I would like to stop. Passive deterrence type of techniques are, for instance, I'm sorry, these are active deterrence actions. For instance, any fauna or birds, we use some dogs, or meaning predators that are trained, or for instance, we use shotguns to scare them away, and we use predators also to rush them away. And passive, it's more like trimming of green areas, eliminating nests to be able to stop the families um, and the accumulation, and water, cleaning water, because water also attracts wildlife such as birds and rodents and some mammals as well. So eliminating any water source that might be around. Also removing organic matter, amongst other, like waste control. So by doing this or undertaking with these preventive measures, we are mitigating the bird and fauna impact on operational security. Again, we need to define the uses of human spaces versus habitat and wildlife, and how it cohabitates together, but also how it needs to be controlled. And there are many opinions on the matter, but it's very important because engine damage is one of the most predominant and common damages because of this crashing with birds situation. However, we are doing tests and shock tests to make stronger engines. We use also lands, we use birds and chickens to do some testing in order to do engines that have less propellers that can cause damage. Like this, we can mitigate the damages and lower the impact on birds when they crash against aircrafts. Climate change and operational safety, it's another important part of this. Here, we can see the issue of temperature, the rise on the temperature from 1980 up to date. It has increased 1 degree approximately. Some argue on this, but it's basically estimated that for the year 2100, we estimate that the temperature will rise 3 degrees centigrades. And this, imagine, with 1 degree, there's so much damage. And we can see the alteration of hurricanes, we can see the infrastructure damage, etc. But if it reaches 3 degrees, I cannot imagine the tragedies. Basically, we need to have some increase of temperature at a global level has restricted sometimes the departure of aircraft. Sometimes they cannot fly because they need cooler conditions for flights. So this is already affecting, and I can mention the airport of Phoenix, Arizona, where the temperature reached 48 degrees, and they had to cancel 40 flights approximately because of the high temperatures of 48.8 degrees centigrades. And also we have the opposite. When the temperature drops too much, then it's too cold, and freezing temperatures are also damaging aircrafts. Now, let's see the other side of the coin, how aviation is depleting and harming the environment. And this is also a good part, and I like because it makes us aware of how aviation also harms the environment. You know that aviation is one of the most important sources of contamination for the greenhouse effects. But it's not only about greenhouse effects, it also brings noise pollution, and gas emissions are very high. Also, sprays, either with sulfates or with water, steam or water vapor, produces more ozone contaminated surrounding air, and it also contaminates the underground water. We can mention that regarding CO2 emissions, 3% of global emissions come from aviation, which we can see how important of a contaminant it is. It's not only that, also the emissions of NOx, nitrogen oxides, of airplanes contribute to 58% of climate change and of water quality. Also, as I mentioned, noise contamination or acoustic contamination, this noise affects wildlife of the surrounding areas. And in England, there was a study made, and this has been evidence that even surrounding birds to some of the airports, especially in Heathrow, birds have alternate their schedules and their radius because of the noise of aircrafts surrounding the Heathrow airport. We also need to mention the PM10 particles. Remember that in COVID times, we talk about the particle matters, which is the right term. Particle matters, we talk about 5.2, but here we're talking about PM10, which are the ones detached from the aircraft's turbines. And of course, this is provoking some respiratory problems, breathing problems. It affects the lungs, it affects the bronchi. And of course, this is evidence based, and it also produces cardiovascular or heart disease in especially our senior population and the elderly. We can see then how aviation is a huge contributor to the environmental depletion. We can see here the emission type per transport type. For instance, a transatlantic flight can produce so much of CO2 as what one car can produce throughout one complete year. So imagine, this is how contaminating aviation is. But however, not all of it is bad news. We can highlight that there are measures being undertaken for noise reductions. For instance, in the last 50 years, as you see in this presentation, we have reduced noise in 75%. However, we are still short on the aim or the objective, which is to have and reach a more significant reduction. We have even transformed the turbine in order to reduce the bypass ratio and noise. Also, new engines are much more silent than those in the 80s or 90s. There we see modern engines. As I mentioned, we have installed new technology what we call a major bypass ratio. It has a much better bypass ratio because the technological we use cross-cutting technology, and this is helping a lot on the noise generated. Operated procedures as well, like for instance, noise reduction in the proximities or the continuous descents or limiting nighttime operations, which is where human beings usually sleep. We are talking about 150 decibels, which is the amount of noise producing by an aircraft near a city or near an airport. And there's a permissible acoustic level, which is around 60. And here you can see how the decibels, of course, are an important part of it. And again, we have established a lot of silencing type of technology, like these hush kits, which are placed at the end of the turbines, and of course, the policy and regulations that have been so fundamental because the international community at a different level of organizations, they have really have put this topic on the agenda. And basically, we are really regulating this type of situations that can really complicate things. There are many different entities that are dealing with regulations and policies for noise reduction and to try to really tackle in a more efficient manner the issue of aircrafts to really be able to alleviate and to really reduce the damage on nature. And regarding the International Civil Aviation Organization has implemented different regulations and different standards to mitigate the environmental risks on operational security. This includes better risk management on fauna, also monitoring meteorological conditions and the implementation of advanced technologies to improve noise and safety conditions for different environmental adversities. And also, we also saw how the aviation is affecting the environment because it's one of the main industries causing emissions and greenhouse effects gases. So we are developing new technologies to reduce the print on the environmental, like biofuel, which of course is more expensive than regular fuel, but we are trying that at least this can start with a pilot testing on biofuel implementation. And at least in 50 years, we can predict that 70% of the fuel used by aircrafts can use biofuels and also prevent the use of sprays in order to reduce the carbon print significantly. This is something we are really making an effort to work on and to improve. And with this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. And if you have any questions, the floor is open. Thank you so much. We are very grateful to listen to this presentation. And now we're going to pick some of the questions by our audience. The first question is, what kind of policies should government adopt to reduce the impact of aviation to our environment? Thank you so much. This is a very good question. As I mentioned very superficially, definitely governments need to set forth policies that are really implementing new technologies. They need to also promote new regulations and standards and implement the usage of friendly fuels, like the biofuels we mentioned. And also, they need, and not only for developed countries, but this is for all countries, or not only for developing countries either, but we all need to come together for the aviation impacts to be less of a hazard
Gracias.
for
Tenemos otra
our
pregunta. Usted
countries.
mencionaba en su ponencia
Thank
por
you
darnos
very
preguntas.
much. You mentioned it
Según
on
su
your
parecer,
presentation,
¿cuáles
but
serían
there's a
los
question. According to your
principales
opinion, what
desafíos
are the
del
main
factor
challenges
ambiental
of
o
the
cambio climático que
environmental
presenta la
factor or
abrasión en
climate
nuestro
change that
hemisferio?
abrasion represents in our hemisphere? So how is abrasion affecting our hemisphere? Yes, thank you very much. One of the most important factors is the rise of global temperature, the high temperatures that we are experiencing. This is one of the biggest alterations of producing and triggering tornadoes and hurricanes and other natural disasters. This type of events, even droughts, are taking place outside of the normal season or periods, and this is out of or due to the global warming issue, also the increase of temperature. It's also making airports lose a lot of money because it limits the cargo flights departure as well. They cannot take off with high temperatures. And during a flight, for instance, we can also have turbulence. And this turbulence is something we don't see, but it's present because of the variations on temperature. And this is why we experience more and more turbulence in flights nowadays. And these are on the rise, and turbulence are now in places where in the past it was in existence. So again, higher temperature and the rise of temperatures is one of the factors that are being more abrasive and causing more issues in the aviation sector. Thank you very much. Very good. Now, we want to talk to the environmental officer, Master Rubén Guillermo Mejía del Carmen, Colonel Pilot of the Dominican Republic Air Force, Master of the System of Cooperation among the American Air Forces, SICOFA. Thank you so much for your presentation on the environment as a factor in aviation operational security. Thank you so much for this third theme. And with this, we will take a 15-minute break, and we shall continue with our fourth panelist that is already here in Casa del Soldado for theme 4. So we are going to reconvene at 10:45. This is again Washington time, so thank you very much, and we take a break.
La Junta Interamericana de Defensa te invita a participar en 2 eventos clave que abordarán temas de gran relevancia para la seguridad hemisférica. Taller virtual, previniendo el tráfico de las armas de fuego, municiones y explosivos. Fecha, 2 de octubre de 2024. Hora, 9 de la mañana, Est. Plataforma, transmisión en vivo por YouTube. Este taller busca propiciar un espacio de difusión y transmisión de conocimiento, para fortalecer las capacidades de cooperación hemisférica en la prevención y combate a la proliferación, fabricación y tráfico ilícito transnacional de armas de fuego y municiones bajo un enfoque de seguridad multidimensional. Inscríbete. Seminario Hemisférico de Ciberdefensa. Fecha, 31 de octubre de 2024. Hora, 8:45 de la mañana, Est. Plataforma, transmisión en vivo por YouTube. Un seminario que reunirá a expertos internacionales para discutir los desafíos y avances en ciberdefensa, fundamentales para la seguridad de nuestras naciones en el entorno digital. Inscríbete. Seminario de Prevención, Respuesta a Desastres y Empleo Aeroespacial. Fecha, 6 y 7 de noviembre de 2024. Hora, 10 de la mañana, Est. Plataforma, transmisión en vivo por YouTube. Este evento reunirá a expertos sobre el tema que a su vez ofrecerán diferentes perspectivas sobre lecciones aprendidas y buenas prácticas de las Fuerzas Armadas, seguridad pública entre otros organismos internacionales que han empleado sus capacidades en operaciones de ayuda humanitaria. Inscríbete. Seminario sobre flujos migratorios en el hemisferio. Fecha, 20 de noviembre de 2024. Hora, 9 de la mañana, Est. Plataforma, transmisión en vivo por YouTube. Este evento reunirá a expertos sobre el tema. Compartiremos lecciones aprendidas, experiencias y buenas prácticas sobre la actuación de las Fuerzas Armadas en el control del flujo migratorio, teniendo en consideración la situación que atraviesa el hemisferio, acciones de respuesta en coordinación con diferentes instituciones del Estado e incluso con otros países para el control del mismo, y otros temas de interés. Inscríbete. Todos los eventos son gratuitos y abiertos al público. Asegura tu lugar inscribiéndote hoy mismo. Junta Interamericana de Defensa, promoviendo y fortaleciendo la confianza y seguridad hemisférica. Participe dos nossos eventos virtuais em outubro e novembro. A Junta Interamericana de Defesa convida você a participar de 4 eventos essenciais que abordarão temas de grande relevância para a segurança hemisférica. Oficina virtual, prevenindo o tráfico de armas de fogo, munições e explosivos. Data: 2 de outubro de 2024. Hora: 9 horas da manhã este. Plataforma: transmissão ao vivo pelo YouTube. Esta oficina busca proporcionar um espaço de difusão e transmissão de conhecimento, para fortalecer as capacidades de cooperação hemisférica na prevenção e combate à proliferação, fabricação e tráfico ilícito transnacional de armas de fogo e munições, sob uma abordagem de segurança multidimensional. Inscreva-se. Seminário Hemisférico de Ciberdefesa. Data: 31 de outubro de 2024. Hora: 8 horas e 45 da manhã. Plataforma: transmissão ao vivo pelo YouTube. Um seminário que reunirá especialistas internacionais para discutir os desafios e avanços na ciberdefesa, fundamentais para a segurança das nossas nações no ambiente digital. Inscreva-se. Seminário de Prevenção, Resposta a Desastres e Emprego Aeroespacial. Data: 6 e 7 de novembro de 2024. Hora: 10 horas da manhã este. Plataforma: transmissão ao vivo pelo YouTube. Este evento reunirá especialistas sobre o tema, que oferecerão diferentes perspectivas sobre lições aprendidas e boas práticas das Forças Armadas, Segurança Pública, entre outros organismos internacionais que têm utilizado suas capacidades em operações de ajuda humanitária. Inscreva-se. Seminário sobre fluxos migratórios no hemisfério. Data: 20 de novembro de 2024. Hora: 9 horas da manhã este. Plataforma: transmissão ao vivo pelo YouTube. Este evento reunirá especialistas sobre o tema. Compartilharemos lições aprendidas, experiências e boas práticas sobre a atuação das Forças Armadas no controle do fluxo migratório, considerando a situação que o hemisfério enfrenta, ações de resposta em coordenação com diferentes instituições do Estado e até mesmo com outros países para o controle do mesmo, entre outros temas de interesse. Inscreva-se. Todos os eventos são gratuitos e abertos ao público. Garanta sua vaga inscrevendo-se hoje mesmo. Junta Interamericana de Defesa, promovendo e fortalecendo a confiança e segurança hemisférica.
Join our virtual events in October and November. The Inter-American Defense Board invites you to participate in 4 key events that will address topics of great relevance to hemispheric security. Virtual workshop: Preventing the Trafficking of Firearms, Ammunition, and Explosives. Date: October 2nd, 2024. Time: 9 a.m. EST. Platform: live broadcast on YouTube. This workshop aims to provide a space for the dissemination and transmission of knowledge to strengthen hemispheric cooperation capacities in the prevention and combat of proliferation, manufacturing, and transnational illicit trafficking of firearms and ammunition under a multidimensional security approach. Register now. Hemispheric Cyber Defense Seminar. Date: October 31st, 2024. Time: 8:45 a.m. EST. Platform: live broadcast on YouTube. A seminar that will bring together international experts to discuss the challenges and advances in cyber defense, fundamental to the security of our nations in the digital environment. Register now. Seminar on Disaster Prevention, Response, and Aerospace Employment. Date: November 6th and 7th, 2024. Time: 10 a.m. EST. Platform: live broadcast on YouTube. This event will bring together experts on the subject who will offer different perspectives on lessons learned and best practices of the armed forces, public security, and other international organizations that have used their capabilities in humanitarian aid operations. Register now. Seminar on Migration Flows in the Hemisphere. Date: November 20th, 2024. Time: 9 a.m. EST. Platform: live broadcast on YouTube. This event will bring together experts on the subject. We will share lessons learned, experiences, and best practices on the role of the armed forces in controlling migration flows, considering the situation facing the hemisphere, response actions in coordination with different state institutions, and even with other countries for its control, among other topics of interest. Register now. All events are free and open to the public. Secure your spot by registering today. Inter-American Defense Board, promoting and strengthening hemispheric trust and security.
Únete a nuestros eventos virtuales en octubre y noviembre. La Junta Interamericana de Defensa te invita a participar en 2 eventos clave que abordarán temas de gran relevancia para la seguridad hemisférica. Taller virtual, previniendo el tráfico de las armas de fuego, municiones y explosivos. Fecha, 2 de octubre de 2024. Hora, 9 de la mañana, Este. Plataforma, transmisión en vivo por YouTube. Este taller busca propiciar un espacio de difusión y transmisión de conocimiento, para fortalecer las capacidades de cooperación hemisférica en la prevención y combate a la proliferación, fabricación y tráfico ilícito transnacional de armas de fuego y municiones bajo un enfoque de seguridad multidimensional. Inscríbete. Seminario Hemisférico de Ciberdefensa. Fecha, 31 de octubre de 2024. Hora, 8:45 de la mañana, Este. Plataforma, transmisión en vivo por YouTube. Un seminario que reunirá a expertos internacionales para discutir los desafíos y avances en ciberdefensa, fundamentales para la seguridad de nuestras naciones en el entorno digital. Inscríbete. Seminario de Prevención, Respuesta a Desastres y Empleo Aeroespacial. Fecha, 6 y 7 de noviembre de 2024. Hora, 10 de la mañana, Este. Plataforma, transmisión en vivo por YouTube. Este evento reunirá a expertos sobre el tema que a su vez ofrecerán diferentes perspectivas sobre lecciones aprendidas y buenas prácticas de las Fuerzas Armadas, seguridad pública entre otros organismos internacionales que han empleado sus capacidades en operaciones de ayuda humanitaria. Inscríbete. Seminario sobre flujos migratorios en el hemisferio. Fecha, 20 de noviembre de 2024. Hora, 9 de la mañana, Este. Plataforma, transmisión en vivo por YouTube. Este evento reunirá a expertos sobre el tema. Compartiremos lecciones aprendidas, experiencias y buenas prácticas sobre la actuación de las Fuerzas Armadas en el contexto
security approach. Register now. Hemispheric Cyber Defense Seminar. Date, October 31st, 2024. Time, 8:45 a.m. EST. Platform, live broadcast on YouTube. A seminar that will bring together international experts to discuss the challenges and advances in cyber defense, fundamental to the security of our nations in the digital environment. Register now. Seminar on disaster prevention, response, and aerospace employment. Date, November 6th and 7th, 2024. Time, 10 a.m. EST. Platform, live broadcast on YouTube. This event will bring together experts on the subject who will offer different perspectives on lessons learned and best practices of the armed forces, public security, and other international organizations that have used their capabilities in humanitarian aid operations. Register now. Seminar on migration flows in the hemisphere. Date, November 20th, 2024. Time, 9 a.m. EST. Platform, live broadcast on YouTube. This event will bring together experts on the subject. We will share lessons learned, experiences, and best practices on the role of the armed forces in controlling migration flows, considering the situation facing the hemisphere, response actions in coordination with different state institutions, and even with other countries for its control, among other topics of interest. Register now. All events are free and open to the public. Secure your spot by registering today. Inter-American Defense Board, promoting and strengthening hemispheric trust and security.
Únete a nuestros eventos virtuales en octubre y noviembre. La Junta Interamericana de Defensa te invita a participar en 2 eventos clave que abordarán temas de gran relevancia para la seguridad hemisférica. Taller virtual, previniendo el tráfico de las armas de fuego, municiones y explosivos. Fecha, 2 de octubre de 2024. Hora, 9 de la mañana, Est. Plataforma, transmisión en vivo por YouTube. Este taller busca propiciar un espacio de difusión y transmisión de conocimiento, para fortalecer las capacidades de cooperación hemisférica en la prevención y combate a la proliferación, fabricación y tráfico ilícito transnacional de armas de fuego y municiones bajo un enfoque de seguridad multidimensional. Inscríbete. Seminario Hemisférico de Ciberdefensa. Fecha, 31 de octubre de 2024. Hora, 8:45 de la mañana, Est. Plataforma, transmisión en vivo por YouTube. Un seminario que reunirá a expertos internacionales para discutir los desafíos y avances en ciberdefensa, fundamentales para la seguridad de nuestras naciones en el entorno digital. Inscríbete. Seminario de Prevención, Respuesta a Desastres y Empleo Aeroespacial. Fecha, 6 y 7 de noviembre de 2024. Hora, 10 de la mañana, Est. Plataforma, transmisión en vivo por YouTube. Este evento reunirá a expertos sobre el tema que a su vez ofrecerán diferentes perspectivas sobre lecciones aprendidas y buenas prácticas de las Fuerzas Armadas, seguridad pública entre otros organismos internacionales que han empleado sus capacidades en operaciones de ayuda humanitaria. Inscríbete. Seminario sobre flujos migratorios en el hemisferio. Fecha, 20 de noviembre de 2024. Hora, 9 de la mañana, Est. Plataforma, transmisión en vivo por YouTube. Este evento reunirá a expertos sobre el tema. Compartiremos lecciones aprendidas, experiencias y buenas prácticas sobre la actuación de las Fuerzas Armadas en el control del flujo migratorio, teniendo en consideración la situación que atraviesa el hemisferio, acciones de respuesta en coordinación con diferentes instituciones del Estado e incluso con otros países para el control del mismo, y otros temas de interés. Inscríbete. Todos los eventos son gratuitos y abiertos al público. Asegura tu lugar inscribiéndote hoy mismo. Junta Interamericana de Defensa, promoviendo y fortaleciendo la confianza y seguridad hemisférica.
Les reiteramos los buenos días a nuestra distinguida
Good morning
audiencia.
again,
En vivo, desde la
distinguished
histórica
audience,
Casa del Soldado en
alive
Washington,
from
D.C.
the Casa del
Retornamos al
Soldado in
periodo de
Washington,
presentaciones
D.C.
de la
We
segunda
come back
conferencia
to the
Protección del Medio
presentation
Ambiente.
to
Antes
the
de continuar
presentation
con
of the
nuestro cuarto
second conference on
conferencista, me gustaría
environment
agradecer
protection.
mucho,
Before
ya
going
que sin
ahead,
ellos
I'd
esto no
like
sería
to
posible,
thank
al equipo técnico que ha
the
estado
technical
trabajando tras
team that
bambalinas
has been
y también al
working
equipo de
behind scenes
interpretación.
and also the interpretation
El
teams.
desarrollo sostenible
Sustainable development is not just an objective, it's a shared responsibility. Without action, climate action and environmental protection, we will not have a prosperous future for our states and the future generations. With this quote, I'm pleased to present our following presenter, Mr. Mark Lambrides. At the moment, he's the director of the Department of Sustainable Development of the OAS. He leads initiatives contributing to improve environmental management and practices, even in the water, biodiversity, climate change, natural threats, sustainable energy sectors in all Latin America and the Caribbean. He will share on the topic of support to OAS member states to achieve sustainable development through climate action and environmental protection. Mr. Mark Lambrides, welcome to the Casa de Soldado. The floor is yours. Good morning. It's a great honor to be with you today in this very important conference. I will present in English just to diversify a little bit the language of the presentations today. But for the questions and answers sections, I will respond in Spanish.
Moderator, to officials in the room, I'll accept all protocol having been completed and move right into the presentation. Just quick introduction to myself and the department, a little off script here, but I want to start by saying thank you to Secretary General Luisa Almagro, my boss at the Organization of American States, for his presentation today, setting the tone for the firm commitment of the OAS to supporting the environmental agenda of the Americas and in fact of the entire world. Many people, when they think about the role of the OAS in the world, they think of the work in supporting democracy and human rights and defense, as our brothers and sisters at the Inter-American Defense Board so nobly represents. But within a critical aspect of the Organization of American States, we also have our General Secretariat. And the General Secretariat is responsible for the actions, really, of technical assistance to help to implement the agenda that has been set by the countries of the hemisphere, the OAS member states, and support the member states in various aspects of development. We are committed to human rights, democracy, economic development, and within that body of economic development support is the department that I represent, which is the Department of Sustainable Development. So with that as background, I just want to say, first and foremost, how much I appreciate and applaud the Inter-American Defense Board for its commitment and actions to enhance the coordination of military institutions of the Americas in the fight to conserve, protect, and improve environmental conditions of our hemisphere. And personally, I've really appreciated the relationships, the friendships, the collaborative work with colleagues at the Defense Board and my department as we've worked together on multiple issues of the environment in this hemisphere, most notably in efforts to improve resilience and respond to natural disasters, improving the capacity of our countries to really address natural disasters, whether those are hurricanes, volcanic eruptions, and other disasters that we've heard about today that so trouble our hemisphere and are so critical to our in needing of our response. So we note the critical challenges we face in the Americas with regard to the natural environment. We've heard about a lot of those today, whether those are issues of local air pollution, and our last speaker talked about the contributions of aviation to air pollution, climate change, and noise. We know about deforestation and loss of wildlife and many other threats to our hemisphere and in fact to the world. But most notably on our mind is climate change. While a real distinct threat has become a palpable reality that really causes harm, threatens our nations and our people, impacting and really causing an existential threat that transcends geographical limits and brings us together and demands that we work together to meet these critical challenges associated with climate change. And so within the Department of Sustainable Development and working to address the challenges facing all 34 member states, the question then is, how do we address these challenges and what do we do about it? First of all, we have many people in this room, and it's already been mentioned, we have globally the challenges that have been outlined within the Sustainable Development Goals. The SDGs are a set of global goals related to economics and health and other critical sustainable development challenges that face our world, and the goals are outlined to meet those challenges by 2030. So with just 6 years left to meet the 2030 SDGs, we're far from where we should be. Cascading and interrelated crises are jeopardizing the achievement of these SDGs around the world. And yet, despite good progress to meeting the SDGs in some cases, combined with the threats from COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and the war in Ukraine, among others, we're having real challenge in meeting some of these SDGs. And the Latin American and Caribbean region is really no exception in this space, particularly with those SDGs related directly to the environment. And so we learned from ECLAC in their recent report that the region shows mixed performance towards achieving the SDGs, and only 1/3 of the SDG goals are on track to be achieved by 2030, while 2/3 are either not achieving or in fact moving further away from achieving their goals. And some of the targets with the greatest risks include Goal 6, which is clean water and sanitation, Goal 13, climate action, Goal 1, ending poverty, SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities. In these cases, we're either moving too slowly or in the opposite direction to reach our goals. On the other hand, SDGs 3, which is health and well-being, 7, affordable and non-polluting energy, 9, industry, innovation and infrastructure, and 12, responsible production and consumption, look like they are likely to be achieved. So with so little time to realize the vision of the 2030 agenda and its achievements, it requires unprecedented level of collective action, international cooperation, and commitment from all actors to deliver on these solutions. And that is the reason we're here today, is really to increase the level of collaboration and cooperation in this space. So now moving to the issue of how at the OAS are we moving to address these challenges, and how can we support our 35 member states of the Organization of American States to address the SDGs, particularly in the environmental arena. The photo in this and the related links are coming from our most recent Ministerial for Sustainable Development, where in October of last year, member states from the hemisphere gathered in Nassau, Bahamas, to discuss these same critical challenges, and the highest level authorities on environment came together and made commitments, resulting in the adoption of the Nassau Declaration and the Climate Change Action Plan 2023-2030. And it puts climate action at the center of the environmental agenda, both for the OAS and the member states around the world, around the hemisphere. It moves towards an accelerated pace of climate change leadership to really address this existential threat to our hemisphere and the planet. So my department is tasked with taking these mandates, the declaration and the action plan for the climate, and doubling down our efforts and supporting member states to achieve the outcomes that we so desperately require. So as you can see on this slide, and this slide tries to do lots of things, but on the far right, we tie our actions to those sustainable development goals. And many of those are directly related to the expectations of the OAS and working together with our member states. You can see that our lines of action are many. We work on policy dialogue with our member states, helping them to develop rules and regulations that can better address the challenges of environment, the climate. We're working on exchanging of best practices and experiences and organizing events and conferences such as the one today. And we deliver on international cooperation. We execute projects throughout the hemisphere that help our member states be better stewards of the environment and really address those critical challenges that are facing our hemisphere. So I'm going to talk about many of the challenges that we face in the environmental arena throughout the world and our hemisphere, and put those in the context of the work that the OAS is implementing in the Western Hemisphere. You can see from this slide the vision and our mission statement. I won't read the long mission statement, but the vision of our Department of Sustainable Development as it transcends from the Declaration and the plan of action is to accelerate sustainable development in the Americas through actions that foster greater security, resilience, and inclusiveness. And note the word security right up front and the connection to our collaboration with the Defense Board. The organization of our work is along 4 critical pillars. Those pillars that I'll talk about today are water, energy, natural disasters, and climate change. And each of these arenas, we have developed collaborative programs with our member states to help them to help us better achieve the goals that are so critical for us meeting the SDGs, for us really saving the planet from the threats we face from the environment and climate change. First, I'll talk about our water program. The America's Water Program that we lead is really focused on transboundary water resource management. That is targeting the critical basins, river systems, aquifers that are shared between countries, that are on borders between the nations of the Western Hemisphere. It's really the value added that the OAS can bring in the water arena is to help more than one country in the water management of water that they share. And so we're currently working in many of the most important water systems of the Western Hemisphere. That includes, and it's hard to see on this map, but I'll mention, we're working on the basins of La Plata, Bermejo, Guarani in South America, in Trifinio, 3-country river basin in Central America, Rio Bravo, Grande in North America, and the shared river basin in Haiti and the Dominican Republic in the Caribbean, among other projects throughout and other river basins and aquifers throughout our hemisphere. So in the water program, and quite frankly, throughout our portfolio of work, how do we get this done as a Department of Sustainable Development within the General Secretariat? We focus on the challenges of science, governance, and finance. In science, we support with many institutions. We work with many institutions. For example, working with NASA and the Army Corps of Engineers, we benefit from satellite technology and data that we can use to better analyze the emergencies and risks that our river systems face in this hemisphere. In the governance space, we work with other international partners, such as the UN and others, to help with regional governance of large systems. And in the financing arena, we work with our brothers and sisters at IDB and CAF and the World Bank and the GEF to bring financial resources to the challenges of river and water system management throughout the hemisphere. I put on the screen now a slide that is representative of one project that we supported last year together with the Secretary General of the Organization of American States. As many of you will recall, there was a crisis at the border of the Dominican Republic and Haiti, and it was around the Masacre River. And this river system, for which the border is shared, local communities were in dispute over use of the water. And anytime a water system is shared and one entity takes more water or pollutes the water or in some way impacts the water that affects the other, it can become a source of dispute. And this was the case in this river system. Last year, the OAS came in and our Secretary General, together with our political bodies, helped mediate the political crisis. And we, the technical unit, came in and supported the better understanding of the functioning of this river basin. And we will continue to work together with the DR and Haiti and working with institutions like yours, USAID and others, better understand the threats and possibilities for better management of this river basin so we can avoid these crises that could in fact turn to insecurity in the future and be better stewards of this river basin as we do throughout much of the hemisphere. Still in the water space, I want to mention that the OAS is currently building on our program to include not just freshwater, but salty water, dulce y salado. We're working on developing a ocean program. It's notable that of the 34 member states, 32 have oceanfront property. Unfortunately for our brothers and sisters in the room, only Bolivia and Paraguay currently lack direct access to the ocean, but all other 32 member states have oceanfront property. And more than 30% of the population of the Americas lives in coastal areas. The sea accounts for a larger share of territory than land for most of the countries, especially those in the Caribbean. And the oceans are home to extraordinary biodiversity and support economic development, health, leisure, cooperation, and peace. So we think about the different threats that we face to our ocean, many of which are tied to climate change and to pollution. Those include overfishing and unsustainable fishing practices, includes coastal pollution and marine debris. We all hear about microplastics and the threats that those create in our ocean as they're ingested in our fish, as they're ingested into our bodies. Think about habitat degradation and loss of mangroves, of seagrass, critical habitats that support the wildlife, the fish life of our ocean. And finally, the impacts of climate change, rising sea levels, acidification of the ocean, and increasing strength and propensity of hurricanes, which pose threats to our coastal communities and cause insecurity that cause challenges to our peoples throughout the Americas, and relate to the critical role that our militaries can provide in increasing security in this space. So I want to just briefly mention that the Sustainable Ocean Program that we're building at the OAS is a collaboration with governments and international organizations to execute many actions that will support the policies, rules, and programs to help conserve and protect the ocean while encouraging sustainable use, sustainable exploitation of its many resources. Those measures that we'll target include establishment of marine protected areas, development and use of blue bonds, investing in ocean support, supporting and incentivizing sustainable tourism activities, and strengthening and enforcing sustainable shipping routes and rules. We're investing in scientific research and data collection to better understand the status of marine ecosystems. So to help tackle these challenges, we're working together as members of the Ocean Coalition 2030, working with organizations like the World Resources Institute, the 5 Cs in the Caribbean, UNESCO, the Nature Conservancy, CAF, IDB, World Bank, and others, to really build a coalition that can work with the countries of the Americas to address the many threats that we face from our ocean and to maximize on the sustainable use potential that the ocean offers us. Now transitioning to another pillar of our work, and it's closely tied to what I was just talking about, which is in the area of natural disaster risk management. The OAS is working with member states to deliver on technical assistance and training to meet both resilience and risk reduction needs and critical post-disaster recovery challenges, particularly for the Caribbean and Central American countries. We're scaling up these efforts to offer support with critical science and data gaps, covering critical science and data gaps for risk mitigation, and we'll be developing transdisciplinary training in this arena. We're also building a one-stop disaster response management database to assist countries in responding to disaster risk management. And this is a space with which we've already been working closely with the Inter-American Defense Board. Some of the other areas where we're working in disaster risk management include those of cooperation, capacity development, climate resilience, and including resilience in the Caribbean through science and data for decision making. But I want to talk real briefly about a new initiative. We're building a collaboratory approach with an institution called the Caribbean Community Center for Climate Change, otherwise known as the 5 Cs. This collaboratory will really focus on a number of objectives: facilitating collaboration and knowledge sharing among stakeholders of Central America and the Caribbean, identifying and promoting innovative approaches to leverage data and technology and scientific research to address climate change and the impacts thereof, enhancing capacity in local communities of the region, and fostering partnerships between academia, government, private sector, civil society to jointly work together to increase the resilience of our communities. Next, I would put on screen, just real briefly, a snapshot, a screenshot of that platform that I mentioned earlier, the Inter-American Network on Disaster Mitigation. This recognizes the need for a hemispheric approach for the provision and coordination of assistance and to facilitate and reduce duplication of efforts in the response to disasters when they hit in our hemisphere, in Latin America and the Caribbean in particular. So OAS member states agreed to implement this natural disasters platform. And again, it's a partnership that has included my organization, the department, together with the Inter-American Defense Board. This platform is now available online, and we're working with countries to populate the data in the disaster mitigation network so that countries can use it to talk to each other in response to disasters, learn how they address critical challenges, and request or draw on assistance from one to the other. Third, I'll talk briefly about our pillar that is in this climate change space. The challenge of climate change, we all know quite well. We've heard a bit about today. Climate greenhouse gas emissions have grown by more than 50% in the last 30 years. And last year on Earth, it was 1.4 degrees Celsius warmer than the pre-industrial average in the 19th century. And the 10 most recent years are the warmest on record. In the Americas in particular, we've seen the impacts on poverty. The World Bank estimates that climate change can drive up to 3 million people per year into poverty in Latin America and the Caribbean by 2030. We see its impacts on displacement and migration. Climate change, such as environmental degradation, loss of livelihoods, and unemployment, can lead to these challenges, particularly migration. And without proactive measures to address climate change and development challenges by 2050, more than 17 million people in Latin America and the Caribbean, almost 2.5% of the population, could be forced to move within their own countries to escape the impacts of slow onset climate change, such as shrinking or irregular rainfall. Disasters lead to death and health impacts. Our region, with all of the impacts, has seen many disasters, most notably in November of 2021, 2 huge hurricanes hit Central America, Eta and Iota, displacing the lives of millions of people. And we see this happening repeatedly each year with greater frequency and greater intensity. So within the department, went the wrong direction, catch back up. We are working on addressing climate change in several ways. We're working to strengthen the capacity of OAS member states to understand and address the impacts of climate change in their respective regions, fostering coordination and implementing mitigation and adaptation measures. Based on the resolves, the resolutions coming out of Nassau last year, countries asked for us to help create a regional hub for climate action. This hub will help countries address the financial challenges and implement good practices to develop the capacities and develop strategies and policies focused on the fight against climate change. We're working on cross-cutting collaboration in all sectors, working with our OAS partners in economic development, health, tourism, and other areas to improve decision-making and response. And we're preparing a program on circular economy that will help countries develop lower impact, better recycling, better products in the space of circular economy. Finally, I'll mention our work in the area of sustainable energy. As was mentioned earlier, the critical by our friends from USAID, the critical challenges of sustainable energy, including efficiency, renewable energy, interconnection, and others, are important to address the mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. The OAS, we manage the hemispheric program called Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas. ECPA organizes periodic ministerial meetings, the most recent of which was held in the Dominican Republic in March of this year. And at that, we gathered over 700 people, came together, talk about and exchange ideas on sustainable energy solutions, and the government's adopted a resolution moving us closer and closer towards that clean energy transition that is so critical. The presence of officials in Dominican Republic last year on the energy meeting was important, and I'll note to our colleagues from the Dominican Republic, we look forward to gathering again in the Dominican Republic this coming year to meet at the Summit of the Americas, where topics such as sustainable energy and climate change will be on the table, and we will work towards solutions as a hemisphere. The ECPA program delivers a variety of technical assistance, whether that's webinars, information material, policy guidance, and gatherings, and we're proud of the actions in this space. So as I conclude, I just want to finally, again, thank the Inter-American Defense Board for the opportunity to speak with you today. To the other presenters here, thank you for your wisdom, and I look forward to a couple of questions as we continue today. Thank you.
Señor Lambride, nosotros somos los que tenemos que estar agradecidos.
Thank you very much. And we are the ones that would like to thank you, Mr. Lambride, because it's a very important topic on how to achieve sustainable development. We've reached the Q&A, and from our audience, we have several questions, but due to time limitations, we are only going to ask two. The first question is, which are the environmental challenges that are the most critical that our region is facing currently, and how does these threats affect the insecurity and the instability of many countries of the Americas? It's a very good and difficult question. There's no one specific or singular threat. I would say that climate change, it's the cause of many of the aspects, and it's like the most singular effect that is the most relevant because it's directly related to a lot of the effects that we are suffering from in the whole world, and specifically the hemisphere. Impacts that are, for instance, intensity and frequency of hurricanes, the rise on sea level, droughts, floodings, as well as many other impacts that are really affecting the quality of life and the life itself of the citizens of our hemisphere. And regarding the Americas, it's very important to work together to tackle both sides of the coin of climate change, like gas emissions, like greenhouse emissions. Our hemisphere has countries that are the ones that are producing the emissions. The highest emission countries are United States, Brazil, Canada, and we also have countries that don't emit a lot of greenhouse effects as in smaller countries. So we need to also adapt to climate change. We need to do adaptation measures to mitigate this, because this is the way how we can do prevention to the strongest impacts of greenhouse effects to the region. So we need to tackle then the originators as well. We have a second question that can't miss. How can countries of Latin America and the Caribbean countries benefit from the international resources or international funds to invest in infrastructure and make our economies grow before the face of these environmental hazards? And how can we implement modern technologies for this purpose? Yes, as you know, there are a lot of funds to invest in solutions to face the threats of climate change. There are funds that come from multilateral institutions such as the Global Environment Facility, the World Bank, and other entities, as well as funds from bilateral institutions as USAID, DFID in Great Britain, etc. There are also funds that are available in NGOs and the private sector. The countries of the region can undertake projects where this finance and these funds can be invested to really work on mitigation areas and adaptation works to climate change. With these funds, we can also increase the economy level at a domestic or regional level, because you can invest in modern technologies with this financing. Thank you so much for your responses, Mr. Major Mark Lambert, Director of the Department of Sustainable Development of OAS, on behalf of the Inter-American Defense Board, and on behalf of the audience joining us today, we would like to say thank you for your time on sharing such relevant knowledge. Rest assured, this will be very useful for the development of our military and civilian actions. Thank you so much, Mr. Mark Lambert, Director of the Department of Sustainable Development. Again, I would like to say thank you to the Director of the Inter-American and Defense Board. Thank you so much, Mr. Rick. And also, we want to reiterate the gratitude towards the different delegations, member states, and observers that are joining us today. So thank you so much, Director of IADB and Assistance. Again, in this century, armed forces should not only surveil national and civilian protection, but also we should protect the environment, and we should protect the most vulnerable populations. With this said, I have the honor of presenting our fifth spokesperson, the Patrick Patterson, who is commander, and he is an associate dean of the William J. Perry Center, WJPC. He also completed his doctorate degree on conflict resolution in Novoa University, and his studies were centered in negotiations with military institutions during the transition towards democracies after post-conflict democracies. He's an author of several books on defense and security subjects that have been published in different magazines from the United States as well as from the hemisphere, and of a worldwide reputation and very well renowned. So I give you the floor, Patrick Patterson, who will talk about analysis of the new humanitarian and environmental protection roles of the armed forces in Latin America. Dr. Patterson, Commander, you're more than welcome, and the floor is yours. Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity of sharing the investigation from William J. Perry Center on Climate Change and on Environmental Protection. Perry Center, it's the regional economic center of the Southern Command or Northern Command. We work with many of the countries in the region, not only on topics of security and defense, but also governance. For instance, this week we have a group of students, it's 50 overall, who are in the Defense National University here in Washington, D.C. They're taking a course on climate change and the strategic implications for defense and security. Prior to starting with my presentation, I would like to briefly mention a couple of aspects. All of the information that you will see in the slides are from scientific organizations. They're science-based. They're under the slides. You can check the reference of this material. A lot of this information comes from organizations such as IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the organization, Meteorological Worldwide Organization, that also we access them because they have a lot of information on this subject matter. There's also information on scientific journals and magazines, and I hope that the slides will be made available to you through our organization staff, or you can send me a direct message and I can gladly share this material. This presentation is organized in two parts. The first part is regarding science and the hazardous conditions on climate change. There are 5 facts or data sheets on these challenges. And the second part is about humanitarian missions that our countries need to further develop to face these threats in our countries. And usually all humanitarian missions are connected with missions connected to environmental protection. That is the core topic of our conference on environment protection. Fact number 2 is regarding the high temperatures that we are observing in a lot of parts of our hemisphere. In 2023, last year was the hottest year in the history of humanity. And in 2024, meaning this current year, it's along the pathways to overcome and to surpass the temperatures that we faced last year. You can imagine where we're heading to and what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years or in 20 years when the increase of temperatures in our countries worsen. In this graph, you might see the gray lines. This represents the average temperatures in many parts of the world as of 1940 to 2022, 2 years ago. In orange, above the lines, you can see last year temperatures. And here you can also see 2024 temperatures and how these temperatures are even higher to those of last year. Fact number 2, it's about the lack of progress in the reduction of greenhouse effects, the greenhouse effects or greenhouse gases. And the issue here is that developing countries, the G20 countries, they have direct responsibility over 80% of the emissions, the greenhouse emissions, and the contamination of the atmosphere. And the future of our world is in the shoulders of China, because they are 31% of the main originating countries that are producing these greenhouse emission gases. So basically, the emissions that we see, historically speaking, in the atmosphere, or the CO2 levels in the atmosphere are 14 million years. And basically, we see the high contamination in the area. Of course, some countries are increasing the level of contamination or pollution despite of the warnings on the Paris Agreement, the Paris Declaration on the COP of 2019. Fact number 3, it's a combination of fact 1, which are the high temperatures, and fact 2, which is the contamination level in our atmosphere. IPCC is the organization under UN, and thousands of scientists in our whole countries are studying and trying to find a solution to climate change. And IPCC has developed 5 pathways where the gas reduction of greenhouse effects are determining the temperatures of our planet. Unfortunately, because of these high temperatures and because of the high level of CO2 in the atmosphere, we are in the worst conditions imaginable, meaning we are heading towards a very dangerous direction. And according to one of the reports rendered by IPCC 2 years ago, we will reach a point of 3.2 Celsius by the end of the century, by 2100. So this is very difficult to face if it goes up 3.2 degrees Celsius. And fact 4, it's on evidence, recent evidence on climate change, that it's growing and quickly growing. We've had 2 of the most hottest months in the history of the world, and also in Europe, in Copernicus line, we crossed the red line of 1.5 degrees Celsius this year in the last consecutive months, that last 12 consecutive months. Remember that scientists of the UN warned us that we must do everything it takes to prevent crossing this line of 2.0 degrees Celsius and also of 1.5 degrees Celsius. And they warn us not to go over this line, and we are already crossing the line. The bad news, not only maybe, but it's not only that climate change is growing and accelerating, but we don't have enough time to take actions. We don't have enough time to reduce the threats against our communities. And finally, fact 5, it's about these tipping points. The idea of a tipping point is where we have a cycle of positive feedback, meaning where there is a cycle of a heating cycle of repercussion and consequences that these temperatures can bring. Our neighbors in the north, Canada, had a season of forest fires from May to September of 2023. That has been the worst fire season in the history of Canada. In just 5 months, they had more emissions and more fires than in decades of their history. So all of these high temperatures in isolated and remote areas of the country are now producing much more CO2 contamination, and they're producing much more fires and high temperatures. And you can see the feedback perpetual cycle that this produces. We might lose some control on our future if we are constantly triggering these tipping points. Despite of our efforts to reduce emissions, we will reach a point of no turning back where high temperatures will be out of control. Therefore, repercussions and consequences of climate change in our countries and in our planet are alarming. And it's one of the biggest challenges we've faced in the history of human beings in the civilization. With this bad news on climate change, now I want to turn your attention to the 7 humanitarian missions by security forces in our country. I spent 20 years in the United States, and I was working in the United States as a commander. And now that I work in the William J. Perry Center, I like to share about the humanitarian missions undertaken by our armed forces. And mainly soldiers and armed forces throughout the countries need to play the role of firefighters sometimes, because the forest fires in many countries, in Colombia, Brazil, Chile, Guatemala, Mexico, and also here in the United States and Canada, these are getting worse, these wildland fires, these forest fires. And this is because droughts that are too prolonged, and also we see that the droughts produces forests and jungles that act as a fuel, because it's wood that's very dry and is just waiting for a spark for a wildland fire to be triggered. So these forest fires, we have good example of this in Chile in February of this year it was like 100 kilometers away from the capital city. In Chile, we had a forest fire near the 42 Cerros de Evaporación, or evaporation highlands, and it was a very dangerous fire, not only because of the conditions I mentioned on the last slide, it was also accompanied by strong winds, and because of the slopey geography, we really had a difficult situation because of the inclination of the slopes, and we had tremendous losses of lives. It was around 1,500 Chileans that lost their lives. And Chile has recognized the responsibility and the big challenge of fire in their countries. They have long history of this type of forest fires, and that is why in 2014 we had a example of similar to what happened in February of this year. And the Ministry of Defense of Chile, as well as the government and military forces, have developed military units to support the firefighter department, or the fire departments, that is called CONAF, excuse me. It's called CONAF. But also Marines are supporting these efforts. In the Army, it's called the BRIFE, which are the Forest Fires Reinforcement Brigades. These are Chilean soldiers that are trained by the firefighters of CONAF. And also they are helping and supporting the Navy. And we need to think of the materials we need to develop and how to train ourselves to operate this type of specialized airplanes, like the air tankers that brings millions of gallons of water to control or mitigate the fires. Also the smoke jumpers, which are basically the jumpers that are working like a skydivers. They're trained to jump in isolated areas, as for instance in the northern areas of Canada, where there are no highways or roads and there's no access, and these very isolated parts of the world, or the Amazons, where there is no access to this area. So the smoke jumpers can enter and can fight directly and fight against the fire directly on land. A lot of our armed forces have helicopters. This is universal. Almost all military forces have helicopters, and helicopters are key because they can bring water with the Bambi buckets. And in Peru and Colombia, they are using a new system called Air Guardian, which is boxes full of water that they can pour on the fires in the Air Guardian system. This is humanitarian mission number 1. Mission 2 is regarding the need of evacuating victims and the survivors of these disasters. And you can imagine the amount of disasters we've faced in the Western Hemisphere, in hurricanes, displacements, fires, earthquakes, or volcano eruptions. One of our presenters already talked about volcanoes. Immediately after a disaster, the emergency zone is totally destroyed. People can't go back or return to their homes or their departments. There's no running water. There are no healthcare systems enabled, and the disaster area and the rescue points and the responsibility of combining military efforts in this sense is to evacuate and provide medical care to these survivors for the hours or days that they need to remain on ground without protection from weather, from without protection to rainfall or to high temperature protections, like totally out on the open. This an example of this is in 2014, the Hurricane Odile, Category 3 in Cabo San Lucas. And this is a famous area full of golf courses and big hotels. And when Odile Hurricane hit this place in September 2014, we had more than 26,000 tourists that were trapped without water, food, or air conditioning. And the armed forces came to help transport these victims to other airports of Mexico to be able to help them return home. So that was the action of the Mexican government. We also need to think of evacuation out of the rise on sea level. And according to IPCC scientists, we will have at least one or two more meters on the sea level rise affecting the coastlines of our countries. And the reference and sources are in the slides for you to verify this data. If we lose control of climate change, possibly we will have 2 or more meters of SLR. You can imagine now your Navy bases or the Coast Guards, and these are some examples on the slide of something that might happen in Miami. This is just a computer simulation of what could happen if there's a hurricane hitting Miami. But below it's Georgetown, Guyana, which is the capital city. The sea level in Guyana is totally zero. It's straight in the coastline. So it's very exposed. So Guyana authorities need to think on strengthening their capital city when they have to face the sea level rise. And if we have an irreversible process and we are totally out of control, and if the ice melts in Greenland and the Antarctic, we would have then maybe from 15 to 20 meters of SLR in the couple hundreds of years. And then you can imagine what will happen with our family members, with our big cities, if we have 15 more meters of sea level rise of oceans in our communities. And regarding humanitarian mission 3, heat waves. I already talked about last year, temperatures, and what's happening in 2024. And scientists have some surprises, and they're really amazed on the speed of these heat waves in our countries and how amazingly high it is, and alarmingly high, I would say. So basically, in some parts of the world, it's a lethal level, and they're dying in some parts of the world. There are many examples in developed countries such as Europe and Russia, where they had very excessive heat waves that were very difficult and harsh, and there were thousands of deceased and persons that passed away. So first responders need to consider vulnerable groups. According to IPCC, these vulnerable groups are 15 times more exposed to risks and are at risk of death than other people that have more resilience, that have air conditioning, or have generators or power to produce air conditioning, but farmers working on the fields, migrants or displaced people that are migrating to other countries, extreme poverty, as one of the spokespersons said, the poverty levels that will increase in the future. And as leaders of our security forces, we must think of the police officers and soldiers that are being called to action in these emergency areas. How can we also protect our soldiers and police officers if the humidity levels and the temperatures are so high and there's a risk for our soldiers and officers, and how to protect them then? Also, in our refrigeration or fields of refuge, regarding the new element, the refugee camps, how can we refrigerate refugee campsites? How can we help displaced persons that suffer from excess of heat, and how can we protect them? Humanitarian Mission 4 is something that we see nowadays more and more, massive migration. This is happening in the Darien Peninsula, the transit between Colombia and Panama. According to the forecasts of scientists, this will just increase. And as I mentioned, this added to hurricanes, sea level rise, and many other disasters that will force people to escape from their households, to run away from their countries or from their areas to find a safer place to live with their families, and of course to procure food and like this be able to feed their families. Another example of what's happening with massive migration is what happened in Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil, in Porto Alegre. This section of Brazil received 8 months of rainfall in just 2 weeks of hard precipitation. And as mentioned previously, thousands of Brazilians needed to run away and escape from their homes and their apartment buildings under such conditions of flooding. Military forces of Brazil are still in Rio Grande do Sul and Porto Alegre, providing and assisting the citizens of their country and providing them with aid. Humanitarian Mission 5, it's about water shortage or lack of water. And this is interesting because, of course, we're having this rain and heavy rains and hurricanes and a lot of water, but at the same time we have lack of water and droughts that are taking place and occurring simultaneously. And this is the example of what we call extreme weather on climate change that we suffer from. Many capital cities and many countries of Latin America are suffering from water shortage, from drinking water shortage, and from freshwater shortage. And Uruguay had a disaster also. Quito, Ecuador, Bogotá, and Colombia have declared a state of emergencies because of lack of water. Santiago de Chile also faces huge water shortage. And there are many other problems, not only the disappearance of tropical glaciers. According to scientists, 2/3 of these glaciers will disappear by the end of the century, but also the lack of irrigation or lack of water to irrigate their crops and to give water to their livestock. This is one of the photos of the tropical glacier in Peru and the de-icing issues, the melting content of water used in the tropical Andes. This is according to environmental research letters. But lack of water might be the worst situation in the whole hemisphere. This is something that's happening now in Mexico City, with 22 million of inhabitants, and Mexico is almost to the point of day zero, where there has no been drinking water for millions of people. And you can imagine the authorities in the city need to be planning how to supply drinking water to millions of inhabitants of Mexico City. And this is increasing in other cities in the region, as is happening now in Mexico City. Humanitarian Mission 6 is connected directly with lack of drinking water, and this is food insecurity, excuse me, where droughts and forest fires are really drying and basically killing crops in the hemisphere. And it's not only Latin America and the Caribbean, this is happening all over the world. And the forecast of scientists is that we are going to get hungrier in the region because of the lack of water, which contributes to the lack of food production in many parts of the world. Last mission, number 7, it's very sad, but it's the reality on events of massive effects. Hurricanes, mudslides, landslides, eruptions, flooding can cause a lot of disasters. And our region has a long data of these events. What happened in Peru in 1970 with the mudslide, that a mountain fell on top of this town, or what happened in Elevada de Ruiz in Colombia in 1985, or in Vargas, Venezuela in 1999. The response to these disasters that are so ingrained is the responsibility of a lot of our security forces, meaning soldiers, Marines, and many others. And ladies and gentlemen, the climate change situation in our communities, it's alarming and dangerous. It's growing in an accelerated rate more than we anticipated, so we don't have enough time to prepare ourselves or to work on our army preparedness. So all of you listening to this conference, it is of utmost importance to understand the climate change problems that we're facing and to prepare our security forces through training, through education, through raising awareness, through procurement of new equipment, airplanes with bucket capacities, and all these airplanes and type of tools we saw. It's very important because we only have a small window to really reduce the risks to our people and to our communities. This is the message I wanted to deliver. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Patterson. Thank you for this brilliant presentation and this comprehensive scope and view of the environmental protection responsibility. So thank you, Mr. Patrick Patterson. We have audience of more than 40 countries, and there's one question. Is what measures should military leaders and military chiefs should take to protect their military bases before the threats of climate change? Yes, very good. Maybe I just want to mention that first is to protect our facilities. As you can imagine, in the United States, our dependency on electricity. We depend on electricity and power. If there's no generators in our bases, in our headquarters, and sometimes this comes from a public or private company. If we lose electricity, if we lose this private distribution company, we won't have communication centers. We won't be able to communicate with our military bases. We must also consider the capacity of our troops, soldiers, Marines that need to go and be transported to emergency zones. They need also to rest. They need food. They need drinking water for themselves. And if we run out of electricity, if we lose our power autonomy, we will have an issue with our troops to train them. And if we don't help them, they cannot go and provide help to the other citizens. And also base infrastructure. I mentioned the sea level rise. It's a concern on our Navy bases throughout the country, in our Marine Corps as well. And it's highly costly installing contention walls or protection infrastructures to protect from the tidal waves. So if the airstrips of airplanes are under high temperatures as well. The pilots, as mentioned by our colleague from the Dominican Republic, the colonel pilot of the Dominican Republic Air Forces, he mentioned that it is a big concern because the high temperatures enable planes to land in airstrips that are overheated. So we need to protect our facilities. We need to protect our military bases, our marine bases as well. Thank you very much. And the second question from an audience colleague, well, the change of temperature will produce more instability and insecurity through manifestations or through disruptions. This participant would like that you talk more about this disruption topic. Yes, there's some studies done in the Paris Center. There is, of course, an insecurity sensation that will arise from climate change. There's some institutions, of course, that don't have enough funding or resources on their budgets. And since this is a very fragile state, they're weak states or fragile states, the answer to climate change or natural disasters, of course, is going to be less because they lack of resources or they're underfunding. When we talk about climate change problems, they can exacerbate or they can amplify issues. And in this case, we will have an impact on lives, a humanitarian impact, and an impact on societies. One of the spokespersons mentioned already the high rates of poverty that exist in some of the countries of Central America. Central America is 40% of the populations that live in extreme poverty levels or under the poverty line. And in other countries in South America, it's also more than 15%. And people will get poorer because of climate change issues. We're going to have more people suffering from extreme poverty, from extreme hunger. They will try to procure food, to put money on the table, to feed their families, and a lot of displaced populations that don't have a household will also be highly affected. This is one of like a change of problems that get triggered that will cause, of course, more civil disruptions, demonstrations, and of course, the security forces in our country need to be ready to be able to face this sort of protests and demonstrations.
Decano asociado del Centro de Estudios Hemisféricos, William Perry, Washington, D.C. A nombre de la Junta Interamericana de Defensa y de la audiencia que nos acompaña en esta histórica mañana, queremos agradecerle por los conocimientos impartidos.
We want to thank you for your knowledge shared. This will guide us in the development of our actions, both in the civilian and the military realms. Brigade General Ángel Alfredo Camacho, he is General Director of the Environmental Service, and Otto Rivera of the National Secretariat of Disaster Risk Reduction from Guatemala. Greetings to Colonel of the Brazilian Army, member of the Environmental Department, and we want to thank the participation in this second conference of environmental protection, the participants of Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, Mexico, United States, Dominican Republic, Panama, Colombia, Ecuador, Grenada, Chile, Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Uruguay. Also, we have participants from the Asian region. Thank you, all of you, for your participation in this second conference on environment protection. The multidimensional security is not just the absence of conflict, it's the guarantee of stability, development, and sustainability for all the peoples and the planet. I have the honor to introduce our sixth and last panelist, Brigadier General César Augusto Parra León from the Colombian Army. At the present, he is Minister Counselor at the Colombian Embassy in the United States of America. He is server of the construction of territorial peace in Colombia from the roles of consultant and panelist for different United Nations agencies. He is commander of the 6th Division of the Army, where he highlighted by his leadership on environmental issues of the Amazonia. He was appointed as Invisible Hero by the Javeriana University. He's promoter of leadership of the military forces in environmental justice through the institutional articulation and international aid to development. He has contributed to the implementation of a program of faith in Colombia. Let's receive Mr. César Augusto Parra León. He will talk about multidimensional security, a fundamental pillar for global stability and sustainable development at COP16 in Colombia. Mr. Minister Counselor, the floor is yours. Greetings to our general present here. Thank you for the invitation of the group of the Inter-American Defense Board. Greetings to the officials and all the people who are through social media, social network. Greetings on behalf of our Ambassador Daniel Garcia Peña and the team of the embassy, and all the greetings to all the privates in Colombia and the people. For me, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm proud of talking about Colombia, a very strategically located country. This year, we have a very important event, that COP16. During the morning, we have been talking about environmental crime, climate change, and how this affects everybody. For us, it's very important to tell you what is the approach Colombia has at the present regarding COP16. Multidimensional security, a fundamental pillar, and initially in my presentation, I want to focus on two aspects. I want to tell you what is going to happen in Colombia. What is going to happen in Colombia at COP16? COP16 will be held in Colombia. Colombia has a very important features. It has the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, the second country with most biodiversity. We have 311 ecosystems, and we have 53% forest cover. We have natural parks. We have wildlife and flora sanctuaries. We have two national reserves. We have borders with Brazil, Peru, Ecuador. And this year, after an important process that Colombia has started 2 years ago, we talked about the development plan with the focus of the climate agenda and how we understand the problems in the territory. How do we understand the armed conflict and how the negative impacts of lack of water and everything that has to do with deforestation, extensive livestock, and all these factors affecting negatively our country. And in this sense, COP16 is very important, and it shows the Inírida flower as the image of Colombia because of its resilience, its capacity of resilience. This is the logo of COP16 this year. This is the logo for the world. This allows us to show the beauty of Colombia. About the Biological Diversity Agreement, Colombia is part of it since 1994, and Colombia has attended different activities around this. It has different approaches such as biological diversity preservation. It has also sustainable components. It talks also about distributing the benefits from genetic resources in a fair and equitable way. In the Article 8 of this agreement, it talks about the importance of communities, peace with nature, and why the communities in this. The strategy of Colombia in the National Development Plan is focused on communities, in the dialogue between communities directly with the state. The dialogue is in the regions. That's the reason why the dialogue is in the regions. This biodiversity agreement is very important for all the countries. Colombia has set goals, as all the countries have been doing. When we talk about the global framework of biodiversity coming Montreal, we see 4 objectives for by 2050, but we have 23 goals by 2030 set since 2022, and it's been 2 years for its completion. We see how 30% of the ecosystems have been restored. We want to prevent the legal trade of wild fauna, and this demands the articulation of the states, the stakeholders, and the international community in order to fulfill this. This allows us to identify the objectives of Colombia to comply with this. These goals allows us to understand how we got to the COP and what is going to happen at the COP, because we are going to have all the countries. They are going to evaluate the completion proposed by the countries, and we are going to have a biannual meeting in Cali, Colombia from October 21st to November 1st. 196 countries will attend, more than 2,000 delegates and observers in the blue zone. This blue zone is guided by the United Nations. The green zone is the Colombian zone. This Colombian zone, we are going to see a lot of biodiversity, and 150,000 people will be affected. And we will show the work they will show the work they do for resilience and environmental presentation. We are going to have participants from different countries, NGOs, governmental organizations, Afro-descendants, local communities, peasants, etc. What will happen at COP16? We are going to have high-level meetings. We are going to have conferences and protocols according to the tasks achieved. The 5th Nagoya meeting will be about this high-level follow-up. We are going to have ministers and chief of state talking, negotiating, presenting proposals. We are going to have forums for the indigenous people, local communities, businesses, academia spaces. They play an important role. We are going to have green business fairs, etc. In this sense, Colombia, based on COP16, will have the presidency of the COP for 2 years. What does this mean for Colombia? Well, that means leading discussions and negotiations to arrive into agreements. Also, it means leading negotiations politically and leading politically and facilitating negotiations. And there was another point there. There is a document that has been in preparation. The title is Peace Coalition with Nature. We have invited all the countries to participate because this document will be signed during the second week in the meeting with the presidents, and these are the focuses: good living, justice, social justice, and environmental justice. Well, good living, this means sustainable development, nature as a pillar, without extractivism. Then we need to understand bioculturality. It's about knowing about our indigenous peoples. The third is peace between peoples, stop war, and fourth is human rights as a pillar, as a cross-cutting issue. Number five is respect to international law to ensure peace with nature and peace among peoples, and international cooperation. Taking into account peace with nature and with the focus I mentioned, I will talk about multidimensional security and the importance for the Colombian state. First is the presence of all these countries and why we need to talk about multidimensional security. Colombia is a country, as I said, that it has this national development plan. It has a policy against drugs. This policy, in addition, we have the peace policy and also the security policy. This is, well, cross-cutting with human rights. In that sense, we see that this development plan has identified the threats we face. These are the dynamics of the conflict: social, political, economical, and security dynamics. And when we have peace with nature, well, all the factors should focus on their own missions. The military, national police, to neutralize the threats of the armed groups and how we are going to face environmental crime and how we are going to generate well-being and human development for the population to comply with what the Constitution has said. In these approaches, with those problematics, the presidency of COP, starting in October, has these approaches for all and proposals for all the countries: peace with nature, well-being, well-living, good living, bioculturality. This is the COP of the people. We need a wide social mobilization. We are talking about territories, territoriality. We are talking about the people that are part of those territories, peasants, Afro-descendants. This will allow us to understand their knowledge and how can we help them. The nature of climate change also. Here we are going to, when we talk about the climate change agenda, this energetic transition between fossil economies to clean economies. This is an aspect with an important role in the regional conference. All the Amazonia linked with the stakeholders and the contributions of the multilateral bodies and international organizations. This is about financing for implementation. We are talking about the debt environmental preservation, conservation. There is a articulation of countries, France, others. They are looking for financial strategies to generate a strategy to mitigate the debt of the country in relation to climate change. What are the topics of negotiations? Mobilization of resources. A plan is proposed to generate access and distribution of derived resource benefits, but also a program for the articulation. Article 8J is for a plan for all the indigenous and local communities looking for the rights, to respect their rights. Colombia is facing a lot of problems, but we cannot talk about only the Montreal Summit, but we need to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. We are talking about poverty, hunger, health, and health has to do a lot in this. Mercury in the rivers, this affects the population, gender equality. These SDGs are cross-cutting with the objectives of the Montreal Summit, and we are looking for the sustainable development of the planet, strategic alliances for prosperity. Under the framework of the COP, from the general to the specific aspects, Colombia has understood the problematic. Well, the police and the military have understood that it's their installed capacities allow them the coordination of the actors in the territory. There are areas in Colombia affected by violence, factors of instability. When I'm talking about instability factors, they lack internet, health conditions, and the outlaw groups take advantage of this. In that sense, with their public forces, they provide humanitarian support, they support the community, they have an important role in the multidimensional security to neutralize the threats that are transborder threats. That is why we have presented this example of the Amazonia. This is an interagency coordination between state bodies, corporations, attorney's office, general attorney's office. This allows us to understand the transit of the illegal realm to the legal realm, educating them and making them aware that we don't have to make illegal planting, but well, this was possible with the support of the international cooperation in the Department of Caquetá, with coordination with these actors, but this demands the commitment of everybody in the countries. Not all the governmental actors are part of this, of solving the problem. At this moment, with the policy of the national plan, all the government bodies are for the completion of the strategical plans that the national government has proposed. When we understand the goals, this requires the public force to help to comply with this. Who helps? Who helps? The army. Who helps us to control the problematics? Well, the Air Force in the route, to check the routes of the drug dealers, but what about the regions with poverty? Well, the police goes there to educate them, to strengthen them. The capacity of the public force is multidimensional when we understand the problematics, and this allows us to help them professionalize. And with the bilateral relationship with the United States, we have signed important agreements to strengthen our people. Knowledge transfer and support and resources. And the Perry Institute has made a lot of in this, has contributed a lot with this. We are under a process of understanding the multidimensional security. We need to be prepared for Colombia's, the rest of the countries is part of the national strategies of biodiversity. That plan is for all the countries, and we are going to strengthen this plan at the COP16. But this will be possible with the participation of all stakeholders. If not, also we will have support for the resources, and we need to respect human rights. We need to generate governance between humankind and nature, governance in the communities. We cannot be dispersed, scattered. The conflict affects the population. They feel marginalized. We need to do something about that. That is why we have set the goals for 2030. In that sense, these are some conclusions. We need to have this capacity and believe increasingly more in our public force, despite all the circumstances in a country such as Colombia. They are the basis of our democracy, our military and our public force. When there are natural disasters, we see how they sacrifice, the private sacrifice their lives in order to help evacuate the people affected. It is important to strengthen the public force with a multidimensional approach that enables to take advantage of its installed capacity. That is why we were looking with strategic alliances, such as the one with the United States of America. We need to understand that we need to improve. The second conclusion is that each state must generate a national strategy of biodiversity and action plans. We in Colombia need an action plan. What I will do to fulfill the goals of Montreal 2030. Civil society, together with government organizations, the public forces, and we need to understand that we need to generate the resources to do this. The third is that it is fundamental the international community support. The international support helps us with programs and resources, but also with an exchange. Where can I teach you? What you can teach me? How can we help each other? Knowledge transfer, capacity sharing, that helps international community to be united. When we talk about natural disasters, when we talk about the increase of the greenhouse gases, what can we do to stop temperature increase? The fourth conclusion is, we think it's fundamental to highlight the Colombia leadership at COP16. Colombia and Brazil, we feel we have a lot of responsibility. Brazil will be in 2025. They will hold COP, the next COP. We need to generate a leadership for all the countries, and we need to propose needs, objectives. We need to understand the peasants, the indigenous people. We need to understand that the peasants are the ones to work the land. This has to do with food security. If we don't take care of water and we deforestate, well, we need to protect our communities, our people. I end my presentation with a video. I invite you to COP16 in Colombia. Hopefully all of you could come. Those who visit Colombia don't want to leave Colombia. They want to come back always.
Colombia, tierra de biodiversidad incomparable.
The land of incomparable biodiversity with many species. We will celebrate our independence, and we are the defenders of this natural richness in a crucial time for our planet. We will be the seat of COP16 to preserve nature and the planet. Let's make a difference, all of us together. Peace with nature. This July 20, we celebrate nature and our commitment with environment. COP16. Thank you so much. I am here to answer questions. Thank you, Minister Councilor Parra León. It's a luxury to have you here. Thank you for your presentation. Now we have the session for Q&A. We have selected only 2 questions. The first one, in relation to COP16, what would be the strategy of the role of the public force that contributes to the protection of environment and biodiversity in Colombia? I will focus this on 2 parts. The first part is the resilience capacity of the public force to generate environmental governance in the region through the example of the engineers battalion. They help to reforestate, to help in prevention measures, but they also, we know that environmental education must transcend in the military forces. We need to know what are our threats, but the first challenge is the training. The public force is having to be part of the completion of our objectives in the tasks acquired at the Montreal Summit. We are aware that we need the public forces with its capacities to comply with our to fulfill our commitments. But from another approach, our public force and the national police have been doing activities to comply with the regular security events, measures. We are aware that of the amount of people we will host. We have been preparing our people psychologically, mentally, and technically so that they are an example, and we will comply with everything in the best way. The second question is, what would be the main challenges in environmental matters during COP16, and how Colombia would be prepared for this? Those challenges are part of what we have said. We have important challenges The first one is that we are setting the example. We have to be support. We are committed to demonstrate an example of coordination, articulation, how we are committed to understand, and there are other countries' experiences that help us to understand. Our challenges is to help the Colombian state to comply with the main objectives because we have regions affected by violence. Air Force, the Air Force, the military, we need to understand this in this way, and we could need to commit to fulfill what we have committed to.
César Augusto Parra León, ministro consejero de la Embajada de Colombia en Estados Unidos.
Brigadier General, Colombian Army Minister, Counselor at the Colombian Embassy, on behalf of our audience and the Inter-American Board, we want to thank you for your time and for sharing your knowledge. Please be sure that all of this will be very useful in our work. Our best wishes for Colombia and success at COP 16. Next, I have General U.S. Army Richard Haycup with the closing remarks.
Well, I'll give you all a second to put your headphones back on. I'm afraid I'll be one of those who is not speaking in Spanish. But first of all, General Parra, I want to thank you for acknowledging the Colombian engineers. God bless you. As well as Mark for acknowledging the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. This is all near and dear to my heart. And I would like to expand on what Lieutenant Flores, the remarks he made coming from the college. He's in our research department. And for those of you who think there's no business for a lieutenant in Washington, D.C., I'm glad you proved them wrong. Well done. So those of you here bearing the cloth of your nation, I'll remind you, we're in the business of security and defense. And so what business do you have related to the environment? And I would tell you that you have to safeguard the treasure of your nation. And the treasure of your nation in many ways comes in the fisheries, in the mineral resources, and in the forests of your nation. And so what also comes as part of the environmental concerns that we have are the illegal fishing that occurs, the illegal mining that occurs in many of our nations, and the deforestation. The deforestation happens in many times to gain the timber illegally, but also to deforest to allow for either legal or illegal agriculture. The illegal fishing can have devastating effects on legal fishing and those ecosystems that are then overfished and do not provide the opportunities for those communities that rely upon those fisheries for their own livelihoods. That illegal mining uses horrible techniques to gain those minerals that often result in pollution to water sources, often results in horrible erosion to those areas. You then have this cascading effect of what I just described. You make it impossible to live there because the water systems are polluted. You make it impossible to live there because you can't make a living. The fishing systems have been decimated. You can't live there because of the illegal operations going on, the corruption that's going on, because you're paying people off in order to do illegal mining or illegal agriculture or illegal timber, and it's no longer safe to live there. And so people of those areas decide that they can no longer safely reside there. And you now have migration. And as you who are in the militaries and securities forces have to support your nations in dealing with the migration. And they will go to an area where they can safely live with their families and have some way of scratching out a living safely with their families. And you will be asked by your nations to somehow support and manage this unmanageable migration of people because of these environmental factors, these illegal environmental factors that have been allowed to exist. So whether you are in the Navy and have a responsibility for domain awareness of maritime assets, the illegal fishing that's going on in your waterways, in your exclusive zones, whether you are in the Air Force and you have aerospace domain awareness, trying to know what's going on deep within the forests of the Amazon, whether you are in the Army and you are on the ground trying to stop the illegal activities in your areas, or whether all of us are trying to deal with migration. We all have a role in an environmental action of some kind. And so I want to thank all the speakers who have been here today. I want to thank all the organizations you represent and the actions that we are taking. I want to thank the board and the delegates and the nations you represent in the collective actions, because we as a multi-dimensional, multilateral organization are only as strong as the actions we all take together. Thank you very much for participating.
Señor director del Colegio Interamericano de Defensa, Richard Haykan. En nombre de la audiencia de más de 7,000 personas de 40 países, le damos la gracia por participar
Thank you
y durante
so
toda la mañana
much
tomar las incidencias
for
de
your
nuestra
remarks,
agencia
Richard
en
Haitkamp,
esta segunda
General U.S. Army Director of the
conferencia
Inter-American
de
Defense
protección
College,
en medio ambiente.
AIDC. Thank you so much for
Gracias,
your remarks in this second conference of environment protection. We want to express our gratitude and thank you for showing us your commitment for the protection of the environment at a hemisphere level. We are very grateful to you. Next, I would like to present the Brigadier General Marco Antonio Álvarez Reyes, Chairman of the Council of Delegates of the Inter-American Defense Board, who will take the floor to adjourn and close such an important conference. The floor is yours.
Muy buenos días a todos, distinguidos participantes y
Good
ponentes.
morning, dear participants and spokesperson. Thank you so much for joining us in this second conference of environment protection.
Es para mí un honor dirigirme a
It's
todos
an honor
ustedes
to address the floor and to
cierre de esta
address
conferencia
these
en nombre de todos quienes
special
integramos
guests
la
and
Junta
attendees on
Interamericana
behalf
de
of all of
Defensa,
us that are part of
entidad
the
perteneciente a la Organización de Estados
Inter-American Defense
Americanos,
Board, pertaining
una entidad
or
internacional
being
con
part
ánimo
of the
militar.
Organization of American States, an
Durante esta
institution with
jornada,
a military soul. During
hemos
this
sido testigos de valiosas
session,
exposiciones que nos han
we've been
permitido
witness of
reflexionar
valuable presentations that how allow us to reflect on the deep interconnection between environmental
la
protection,
seguridad hemisférica,
hemisphere protection,
continental y
hemisphere
mundial.
security, continental and worldwide
En nombre de la
security,
Junta
and how they're all
Interamericana de
interconnected.
Defensa de mi general
On behalf of the
Flavio
Inter-American
Luis
Defense
de
Board
Oliveira de la
of
Fuerza Aérea
Flavio
de Brasil,
Luz de Oliveira,
de mi
from
mayor general
the
Richard Haykan,
Inter-American
director del
Defense
Colegio
Board,
Interamericano de
as
Defensa,
well
y del mío
as
propio,
Richard
les
Haitkamp,
expreso mi más
director of
profundo
the Inter-American
agradecimiento
Defense College.
y de
Thank you
manera
so much. I want to
muy
express
especial
my
a
utmost
nuestros
gratitude
ponentes,
and thank you so much to all our
quienes
presenters, our
nos han compartido
spokespersons
su
that have
conocimiento y
shared
experiencia en
your
temas
knowledge,
fundamentales.
your know-how, your
Nos
expertise
hacen
in such
reflexionar.
vital topics that make us
Dentro de
deeply
algunos de ellos
reflect.
quisiera citar el
And
siguiente.
I would like to quote
El
the
desarrollo
following
sostenible
remarks.
debe constituirse
Sustainable
como un eje
development must
transversal
constitute as a
en la
cross-cutting
conducción
axis
política de
in
las
the
naciones del
political
hemisferio.
direction of nations around the
El
hemisphere.
enfoque
the multi-phase approach to protect critical ecosystems with renewable energies requires capital flows with associated investment in other sectors. Climate change poses risks, not only in air operations, but in every moment, under every circumstance. To tackle the challenges and face them regarding sustainable development, it's something vital and necessary, and the authorities need to take it into account at the highest level possible. The effectiveness and prompt reaction towards climate events that have surprised our populations or nations lead us to act before these challenges and like this to avoid surprises. Conservation of biodiversity, as we seek in our agreements, also avoids a criminal governance, amongst many other spokespersons that I heard today in the presentations. These are some of the quotes. Again, thank you so much for Alfonso Flores Rojas, Lieutenant of the Mexican Navy of AADC, as well as Gerardo Arroyo, Environment Officer, Master of the U.S. Agency of International Development, Ruben Guillermo Mejia del Carmen, Colonel Pilot of the Dominican Republic Air Forces and Master of SICOFA, Mark Lamberts, Director of the Department of Sustainable Development of the OAS, as well as Patrick Patterson, Commander and Associate Dean of the William J. Perry Center, and Cesar Augusto Parra León, Brigadier General, Colombian Army Minister Counsel at the Colombian Embassy in the USA, and all of you attendees from Pakistan, from Kenya, France, Switzerland, Taiwan, Sierra Leone, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Angola, and other important countries. That's what I'm also quoting, the importance that this conference has for us at a worldwide level. This exchange of ideas and information sharing and experience sharing has reminded us that the environment protection is not only the responsibility of governments or of our armed forces, it is an urgent need to guarantee and safeguard security of our future generations. It is our joint duty from each of our security and defense institutions to do international cooperation and foster dialogue, ideas sharings, and to be able to have a common understanding in a coordinating fashion. Again, thank you so much for those following us online, all attendees, organizers, collaborators that enable us to create such scenarios at the highest level possible. With these closing remarks and with the authorization of General Richard Hakeman and also of the Director of the Inter-American Development Board, and also with the authorization of Brigadier Flavio Luis de Oliveria de Pinto, Director General of AADB, I adjourn this second conference on environment protection. Greetings from the House of the Soldier, or Casa del Soldado, in Washington, D.C. This meeting is officially adjourned. Thank you so much, Brigadier General Marco Antonio Alvarez Reyes, Chairman of the Council of Delegates of the Inter-American Defense Board. With this, we adjourn and finish the live broadcast of the second conference on environmental protection. We want to say thank you to the approximate 9,000 participants, and a historic participation of 54 different countries, not only of the hemisphere, but of all the world. We will look forward for the next conference, and again, please subscribe to our next event, which is going to be in October 2nd, which is an online workshop, is prevention of firearms, munitions, and explosives, that will be developed by the Inter-American Defense Board through our website, www.iadb.org. And the certificates of participation of the second conference on environment protection will be submitted to each one of your emails that you noted in the registration form. And we are attaching a survey, satisfaction survey, that we please request to fill in order to be able to render quality products for the continuous improvement process that we would like to improve. With this, we adjourn the second conference on environment protection with a reflection of Martin Luther King. If I would know that the world will end today, if I would only know that the world will end tomorrow, today I would still plant a tree. And I ask you, what about you? What would you do if the world were to end today? Inter-American Defense Board, fostering and promoting the trust and the defense and security of countries. Thank you so much for your attention. Until next time.
Recording stopped.